Too Much Information is a production of iHeart Radio.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Too Much Information, the show that brings you the secret histories and little-known fascinating facts and figures behind your favorite TV shows, movies, music, and more. We are your two avant-garde apocrypha vetters. You wrote these. Your pop art impresarios of pretty awesome facts. Your drug dealers of dense details. That's a very good one. I'm Jordan Runtagh. I wrote these. We are your Venus and Furs of facts, your Buddhas of the Banana album. We'll be your Miros of minutia, here to drone on and on about drones.
Hey, baby, I love drones.
I'm still Jordan Runtagh. Who are you?
I'm Alex Heigl.
Yes. Heigl, what are we talking about today?
Today we are talking about the Velvet Underground and Nico.
Yes.
The album that dropped a grimy East Coast grenade into all that Summer of Love bullshit that was happening in 1967.
They hated that.
Oh, they sure did. And were hated right back, as we'll get into. Not only did it launch the career of all-time rock and roll icon Lou Reed, laconic Welsh genius John Cale, and the rest.
Oh.
I know, I'm a huge Sterling Morrison fan, but isn't Mo Tucker like a weird MAGA person now?
At least Tea Party, if not, yeah.
Right, yeah, Tea Party, yeah. Anyway, the record pushed the parameters of what could even be considered rock music, mixing brill-building style pop with gritty lyrics about the underside of mainstream society and avant-garde experimental techniques from the burgeoning minimalism movement. Jordan, what do you like about this stuff?
Gets down on his haunches like the guy from Stillwater and Almost Famous. Well, to start with, everything. I mean, you know, rock and roll had been built by rebels, but I feel like this is the first album that really earns the distinction of alternative with its subversive lyrics, challenging sonic experimentation that basically risked veering fully into noise at points.
Hell yeah, it did.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the Velvet Underground is strongly associated with Andy Warhol, but I feel like the real crux of the collaboration is between Lou Reed and his literary lyricism and gift for melody, and John Cale's orchestral sensibilities and daring avant-garde arrangements. And to me, that's kind of what elevated them from being a highly literate garage band, something like The Fugs, another New York group, to something greater. And I think that, as much, and we'll get into this in the episode, as much as Andy Warhol was kind of more of an imprimatur, is that the word? Just sort of like co-signed. I think that he did something really important, which is keep everybody else away from the band.
Gave them a long leash and ran interference for them.
Yeah, so that their sound and their, what I'll loosely dub their message, even if that message is, I want heroin, emerging into the mainstream with its rough edges intact. It wasn't sanded down by corporate committee and years of just kind of grinding away at the showbiz hamster wheel. And so you've got these songs that, I mean, I can't really think, and you probably would know better than I, but I can't think of a precedent for these tales of drug deals, sadomasochistic sex, and other snapshots of the urban underworld. I can't think of anything else from around this period that got such a relatively wide release. Didn't really sell that well, famously. That's The Bit, as we'll talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. They are only 4 years out, right, from Bob Dylan, Freewheelin', which is like, I was always taught and still consider like the ground zero of people writing their own lyrics, really.
Yeah.
Everybody else was at this point so informed by Tin Pan Alley and the whole, like, you get a songwriter and then you get a performer and then you get into the studio and record with session musicians. And that was all being upended by, Dylan's writing, first of all, and then to perhaps a lesser extent, the burgeoning rock and roll movement of just people being like, oh no, we also play and also sing and also write.
But we write as well as Tin Pan Alley songwriters was the promise, as opposed to something.
But as far as lyricism, I mean, I have to think, I don't know. It's interesting, man. I always take it back to like pre-war blues, and as is my wont, and there was some pretty racy shit going on in those, like not just about porking, but like stuff about cocaine. Like there's literally a blues standard just called Cocaine Blues.
Cole Porter, right? Isn't that I get no kick from cocaine? If I took even one sniff, it would bore me terrifically too, but I get a kick out of you.
Oh, I don't know that, but I mean, I'm not a huge Cole Porter fan, other than the standards that I've been forced into playing at like brunch jazz. But yeah, I mean, definitely as far as just putting heroin in your lyrics. I mean, people forget that the '60s folk stuff was coming a lot from like these Southern songs, which are all either about murder or porkin', and sometimes about both, as the best ones often were. So, I mean, even though those edges were sanded off a lot by like the Kingston Trio, I mean, you still had like, you know, your Dave Van Ronks and your authenticity obsessed people who were definitely putting out commercial records with songs about like murder and you know, cocaine. But yeah, I mean, as far as especially like the sexuality stuff, I think that's one thing that we can really credit them with is just getting that side of things out there, because otherwise that was such a taboo. And it, in a way, completely informed by their upbringings. I mean, I don't think the blues artists or people who were singing similarly transgressive stuff had access to the idea of BDSM or like leather. Like a leather fetish in the South would just be like your boots, not necessarily like your going out attire or your sexual attire.
I like your boots.
Yeah. You know, I don't know. I might be talking out of my ass there, but I frequently do, and people don't really counter me on it. So
that's a doctoral thesis I like to read. The racial privilege of BDSM.
I mean, you know, leather gear's expensive, dude. I don't know.
Shiny,
and like
shiny boots of leather.
Yeah, and like, you know, even being able to find a transgressive novel on the pavement to name your band after is a truly urbane thing, you know? We're sure as shit weren't going to find that book in Mississippi.
I mean, I think that's a beautiful setup to dive right in. I think we've got
all right.
more than enough to talk about this episode. You got anything else?
No.
Well, from a young Lou Reed's horrifying early mental health struggles to Nico's horrifying entire life, to the first-hand look inside Andy Warhol's factory that the band gave us, to that weird cover art, here's everything you didn't know about the Velvet Underground and Nico. Lou Reed.
What do you say?
He was someone who, from an early age, felt suffocated by social norms and the conformity of the post-war era.
And also was a huge ass. I was writing this whole thing about Nico, and really, you know, I added this whole paragraph about Nico, and I was like, man, we're really piling on her. Should we, like, address the fact that Lou hit women and was, like, such an unrepentant prick for entire decades of his life that, like, no one had a good word to say about him other than he's good at songs sometimes?
Sometimes. Saying the sometimes is underlined.
Yeah.
He was born in Brooklyn in 1942. His dad was an accountant and his mom was a stenographer. They moved out to the Long Island suburbs when Lou was a little boy, not far from the Levittown tract house that housed a young Billy Joel. Could you imagine young Billy Joel and young Lou Reed meeting in a playground? It's conceivable that it could have happened.
I have to think that Billy Joel would have bullied him.
Well, Billy Joel was so used to being bullied, though.
But those are the most dangerous ones.
Oh, yeah. Fair.
You find an even weaker target,
okay,
it's hitting the fan.
So that's very true. Yes. Well, much like Billy Joel, Lou Reed seemed miserable even as a child.
Yes, he did. In the 1995 Wayne Wang Paul Auster film Blue in the Face, do you know anything about this? I stumbled upon this just for the Lou Reed quotes. Paul Auster being more known as
author,
a novelist, but and recently deceased.
Departed, yeah.
But it's just like Lou Reed is like doing all of his stuff over the counter of a cigar shop, just really amazing. One of the things he says in that movie is, "I couldn't have been unhappier in the 8 years I spent growing up in Brooklyn. I say that not having realized what it would be like living on Long Island, which is infinitely worse."
Yeah.
And then I just want to highlight his other quip, which is, leaving Brooklyn for Long Island was probably a childhood trauma that I had, other than the Dodgers leaving Brooklyn. Which, if you think about it, is a reason why some of us are imbued with a cynicism that we never recovered from. Obviously, you're not a Mets fan, and you can't possibly be a Yankees fan, so baseball's just eliminated from your life. Hilarious.
Lou attended Hebrew school, which he'd later describe as, quote, like being in a concentration camp.
Taco Bell sound? I don't know what we're supposed to do with that one, Lou.
Even at this early age, he felt removed from his peers. One friend would later say that while most kids were sneaking beers, Lou was smoking joints and reading French erotic fiction like The Story of O.
Hell yeah, brother.
At the first sign that Lou might not be completely heterosexual, his parents apparently took him to a psychiatrist in an attempt to, in Lou's words, shock the gayness out of him. The less successful follow-up to Peter Gabriel's Shock the Monkey.
Good one, good one.
This is what Lou later claimed, but in the Todd Haynes Velvet Underground documentary from a few years ago, his sister strenuously, emotionally denies this. So,
What does she know?
who knows? There's a lot of unreliable narrators in this story, as we'll find out.
Yeah, that's true.
But this much we do know, doctors apparently thought that he might be schizophrenic and recommended that Lou undergo electro-shock therapy. He underwent, I saw the number cited as 24 ECT sessions, which is just an absolutely archaic, barbaric, I think is a safe term, procedure that had a very traumatic effect on Lou and permanently damaged his short-term memory.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not up on your quasi-medieval medical practices from the mid-century, they just put electrodes on the side of your brain and zap you.
A piece of felt in your mouth or a piece of rubber or something you bite down on and
then they just zap you.
yeah. And I mean, not to put you on the spot, but just medically, what was that supposed to do? Like, I don't understand the physiology behind it.
The brain is all electrical impulses. It's electric. So maybe they were just like, well, let's see what happens if we short that out.
I mean, it sounds like holding down the power button until you boot
like a hard
back
reset.
up again.
Yeah.
I mean, do we think that it's more or less targeted than an ice pick lobotomy in terms of like?
I mean, in theory, less damaging, but
Well, less damaging, but in terms of like actually like having any idea what the hell you're doing.
yeah, I don't know enough about the history of it, but it is horrifying.
Yeah, very much so. So this not only damaged his short-term memory, but it also poisoned his relationship with both of his parents, if not the world as a whole. Lou viewed the experience as an incredible betrayal from the people who were supposed to protect him, and his relationship with his family really never recovered. A friend once said they'd only seen Lou afraid once, when he unexpectedly bumped into his parents on the street.
Yeah, for a more interesting view of his bile, check out Kill Your Sons from 1974, where, aside from his parents, he also takes pot shots at his sister, who he was supposed to be kind of close to.
Yeah, so too.
He sings, "Sister, she got married on the island, and her husband takes the train. He's big and he's fat, and he doesn't even have a brain." Can I just say the quiet part out loud that Lou Reed's lyrics kind of suck sometimes? Like most of the time. Definitely more misses than hits.
I do think I recall reading, it might have been in a book I recently read about Candy Darling, another Warhol Factory superstar, that Lou's brother-in-law like got a kick out of these lyrics and he thought it was funny.
Oh,
So there might have been, they might have had an understanding. I don't know. But yes.
You're going to engage with me on the lyric claim?
No, I can't. He's big and he's fat and he doesn't even have a brain. I mean, that makes Joey Ramone seem like, you know,
Yeah.
Baudelaire.
Rhyming train with brain.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, man. There's a Blue Mask song, an album off the Blue Mask, which is probably maybe my favorite Lou Reed solo album.
Yeah, you like that.
And it's called Underneath the Bottle, which is about recovery from alcoholism. And, you know, there's this one line, I always cite this as the dichotomy of Lou Reed. There's this one line that's like, fell down the stairs and woke up underneath the bottle. And I was like, that's clever. That's a nice little turn of phrase. And then the next verse, he starts with, ooh wee, son of a bee. Just like, you dumbass. Like, that is so stupid.
But then there's stuff like the gun, though.
What's funny, yeah, the gun is horrifying. But what's so funny is that, like, he uses son of a bee in more than one song. Like, he was just, for as awful as a human being as he was, like, afraid of saying bitch on record. It was like, use son of a bee. Maybe just because it was easier to rhyme with. But, yeah. I don't know, man. I love him to death, and I think he's a fascinating artist. But I do not think of him as the lyrical genius that all of his hagiographists would have him as.
I don't know, though. I mean, Heroin, Venus and Furs. I mean, I don't know. Those are pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
He had
I
a
mean,
lot of years to refine those, though, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, like, I don't really think of Heroin as a particularly lyrics-forward song.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, I disagree.
Okay, go on. I think it's more about the sonic side of it, but
To me, it's up there with Tomorrow Never Knows in terms of being an incredibly evocative blend of the music and arrangement and the lyrics. And the fact that the lyrics are so eerily detached in almost like a, Hemingway journalistic sense of describing kind of one of the greater taboos out there. I know Heroin, I mean, even now, I think, has this, whatever the opposite of mystique is.
go on.
I don't think there's a lot of romance in Heroin. I think that it is just seen as kind of the last stop before going off the edge of the cliff in culture. So I think that there's a certain taboo around that particular drug as opposed to, I don't know, opium, cocaine.
No, you're right. I withdraw my claim about Heroin and will instead draw your attention to the bulk of his solo work.
Sure. I mean, because it makes me feel like I'm a man when I put a spike into my vein.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, things aren't quite the same.
Don't read this whole song.
Oh, no, I'm not. I read it very well, though.
You did. A lot of gravitas.
Yeah, no, I just think that there's something an economy of words that I don't possess. There's something so chilling, something so simple, something so, even though I've never done Heroin, something that's so understandable about, oh, okay, I get how you arrived at that place and I get what you get out of this in 3 lines. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Yeah. No, I mean, his economy is definitely something, especially in the age when everyone was even calling their bands incredibly stupid, long run-on sentences, like Arthur Brown's Crazy World of Bullshit or whatever all that nonsense was, Dayglow garbage. And like Dylan too, like, trying to redefine like how many syllables you could cram into a rock song. So I do admire him as sort of the Ernest Hemingway of 60s rock music.
No,
but, for as much as I don't know, man. There's just, have you heard Possum Day?
I haven't, no.
Off of Magic and Loss. It's an 18-minute song. Oh, it's off Ecstasy. Pardon me. I picked the wrong late era Lou Reed. Yeah, it's 18 minutes. It opens up with one of the coolest, like some of the best guitar sound I've ever heard captured. This is from 2000. Oh, I'm
Like
sorry,
a
it's not
Possum.
called. Yes, it's called Like a Possum, not Possum Day. I confused it because the opening line is, "Good morning, it's Possum Day. Feel like a possum in every way." Possum whiskers, possum face, possum breath, and a possum taste. Possum tails, possum eyes, possum bones, possum thighs. I mean, yeah, man, that's not, Yates.
I have made the big decision. I'm going to try to nullify my life. Because when the blood begins to flow, when it shoots up the dropper's neck, when I'm closing in on death, I mean, okay. I mean, yeah, you know what I think this suggests? Sometimes he tried, sometimes he didn't.
Yeah, exactly.
And you know what? Who among us?
I almost like more when he's just like free associating, like in Coney Island Baby, when he's like, I was just wanted to play football for coach. Too small to play tackle or something. This one goes out to Lou and Rachel and all the kids at PS 192. Which is where he went.
I know. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, neither of us won.
Yeah, I think I think we both argued our point well.
And it is, after all, Possum Day. So, in my heart, every day. Anyway, getting back to ECT, one of the most famous victims of it was Ernest friggin' Hemingway, who was treated with ECT as many as 15 times in December 1960, and he had a much shorter run of it than Lou Reed did in terms of surviving. In January of the next year, he was released in ruins, according to one biographer, Jeffrey Myers. Another biographer and his close friend, A.E. Hotchner, reported in his book, Papa Hemingway, that Hemingway's loss of memory caused by the ECT made him even more depressed and hopeless. As Hemingway had stated, well, what is the sense of ruining my head and erasing my memory, which is my capital, and putting me out of business? In July 1961, shortly before his 62nd birthday, and soon after Hemingway had been given still yet another series of shock treatments, he committed suicide with a shotgun.
That's murder.
Yeah. I'm
Sad.
just gonna research this right now.
Do we think, I mean, not to get totally off topic, that with Hemingway, almost like with Howard Hughes, when he was testing out a lot of the planes he designed and they kept crashing, he kept repeatedly hitting his head, and I think that exacerbated latent mental health problems, but basically gave him, traumatic head injuries that made it infinitely worse. Do we think that with Hemingway, with his incredible
Alcohol intake?
Well, I was going to say just active life, during which time I think he was severely injured by bulls and boats and barracudas and God knows what else. Other bees, son of a bees, yeah. Callback. Yeah, I do wonder how much, and as you said, the drinking as well.
Convulsive therapy was introduced in 1934 by Hungarian neuropsychiatrist Ladislas J. Meduna, who, believing mistakenly that schizophrenia and epilepsy were antagonistic disorders, induced seizures, first with camphor and then metrazole. This Italian guy, Ugo Cerletti. Cerletti had noted a shock to the head produced convulsions in dogs. The idea to use electroshock therapy on humans came to Cerletti when he saw how pigs were given an electric shock before being butchered to put them in an anesthetized state. Just horrible from the ground up, this practice. Jesus, I also forgot its most famous portrayal in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where it destroys, Jack Nicholson's character.
I thought that was lobotomy. I thought at the very end they see these like scars up by his
his temples, because that's where they have to put it, because that's where your skull is thinnest, and they have to put like an incredible amount of volts through your brain and to even get across the skull barrier.
Oh, well, I knew that. I always thought
maybe they changed it for the movie, but it's in the novel.
Lobotomized in the film, at least. Yeah. Wow. That is horrifying. So now let's get back to the happy world of Lou Reed and the Velvet Underground, shall we?
So much better than pigs being shocked.
Looks like Teletubbies compared to this. Okay. Lou Reed started performing music when he was a teenager in the mid-50s with a group called the Shades.
Racist?
No, they wore sunglasses.
Oh, okay.
That's it, yeah. Cool. But probably also yes.
They were from Long Island.
Yeah. Aww. We got some friendly complaints from some Long Islandites for our portrayal of Long Island in the Billy Joel episode, even though most of them were quoted directly from Billy Joel himself.
Yeah, come on, man.
Yeah.
Your most favored son is saying that.
Notice how I didn't call the Shades a band. Lou later said in an interview that the Shades wasn't a band. It was just one guitar and two other guys singing. They would play basically anywhere that would have them out on Long Island. They first played at a local talent show, then shopping malls, and then some really divey bars. And there are some great pictures of them in the 50s with shoestring cowboy bow ties and blazers singing Little Richard songs. It's really... Are
you referring to bolo ties?
No, I thought bolo ties had were like the two strings but didn't have like a bow.
Oh, that's an interesting point. If you were a loved one, know the difference between a string bow tie and
a shoestring bow tie.
A bolo.
Please
get in touch.
Yeah. But like I said, because they were the Shades, they wore sunglasses all the time, and Lou basically never stopped. They then changed their name to the Jades, because I guess there was another band around called the Shades. And in 1958, they made their recording debut with a song called So Blue, and the B-side, Leave Her For Me. And it's straight doo-wop with Lou Reed on backing vocals and King Curtis on sax.
That whips.
Legendary, yeah. Oh my God. What
I wonder if it was in his No, if this was in 58, he still had a career at that point.
Yeah, he was playing with like the Coasters and stuff.
Probably
right?
just flew in to do a solo and left. I would assume.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Man, Lou's doo-wop affectations are so hilarious. There's like an
Do you know these songs?
take of. No, I would never listen to them, but I have no interest in them, respectfully, because on the one loaded box set, there's like a alternate version of Rock and Roll where he tries to put do a doo-wop intro into it, and he's like, ooh, and it's just awful, but it's so hilarious.
I think that's my favorite non-John Cale-centric Velvet Underground song, rock and roll. Like Heroin and Venus and Furs are like, I think, my two favorite overall. But
yeah, dude, people on Loaded because it's like ghost Velvet Underground, but those people are wrong. There's so many amazing songs on there. Lonesome Cowboy Bill, come on.
Yeah. So this early Lou Reed doo-wop band got picked up by a major label, Dot Records, and their release became a regional hit. And Lou later said that he made $3.50 in royalties. And as he later observed, that was a hell of a lot more than I made in the Velvet Underground.
Wasn't that like $50 to $75 in money back then, though?
Yeah. I mean, I know in the Spotify era that seems normal, but...
I was going to say, that sounds like my royalty payouts for my entire career.
Oh, you have a new album out. Tell the folks about your new album.
Oh, I do have a new album out. Yeah, it's called The Good of the Scorpion, which, yes, is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia reference. Jordan has Lighter Up. It's mostly instrumental guitar. There's a few vocal samples in there. There's some synths on there. I played all of it. Check it out on Bandcamp, or if you want it for free, on the streamers. Yeah.
You should do like a Dark Side of the Moon, Wizard of Oz kind of thing, and like have the instrumentals playing as you listen to our podcast. No, as you listen to our podcast. It's like a nice soundtrack. Maybe.
The album is not long enough for that. You have to listen to it like 4 times. But thank you, Jordan. That's very sweet.
You should really check out some of Lou's doo-wop stuff. He actually continued a few years later in 1962. He had some solo songs they released under Louis Reed, which is hilarious. There's one called Your Love, and my favorite called Merry-Go-Round. And these went unreleased for decades until the great Brooklyn-based reissue label Norton put out, I think it was an EP or something a few years ago. And it's great. The cover of it has this picture of young Lou Reed looking like a wannabe Ricky Nelson with his hair in a pompadour. It is just tremendous. Wait, I'm going to send this to you. It's like a good song. So this is Merry-Go-Round. Oh, and the EP is called All Tomorrow's Dance Parties, which is pretty funny.
I walk you home, yeah, every day from school. But still you treat me like I was a full merry-go-round. Whoa, you got me going upside down. You said you'd never date another boy, but still you treat
Yeah, this sucks.
me like I
Oh,
was
come on, really?
I don't like this.
But Lou likes it.
This is such a miss. I'm sorry. His voice is so like nasal and grating, even on that like, I mean, he was very young, but even on this, no, I don't vibe with this. Rock and roll didn't get interesting until we started stealing from black people.
I love how in this sort of like nebulous band that he had in college, nobody ever wanted him back, so they just changed their name over and over again because that was the only way they could get repeat bookings. It's just like the oldest trick in the book, but Speaking of college, Lou Reed, bad college roommate or the worst college roommate? Discuss.
I mean, surely there are Charlie Whitman. We'll leave that one for you folks to pick up on the way home.
Lou Reed did a semester and a half at NYU before opting to transfer to Syracuse, which maybe you know is a move that doesn't seem to make much sense to me, considering his urbane pretensions.
Go far up into the glaciers.
Yeah, I don't really. I thought he would have loved hanging out in Greenwich Village in like the late 50s, early 60s, considering the budding beat that he sort of was. But yeah. But it ended up working out for him because Syracuse is where he first became interested in a serious way in writing. He initially thought he was going to be a journalist, which is hilarious considering how much he would come to hate journalists. Probably his most connection during this period at Syracuse is with the poet, author, and professor Delmore Schwartz. Schwartz became a mentor figure to Lou and helped him home his penchant for literature and cynicism, though not necessarily in that order. Reed told writer Bruce Pollock in 1973, Delmore Schwartz was the unhappiest man I ever met in my life, and the smartest, until I met Andy Warhol. Once, drunk in a Syracuse bar, he said, if you sell out, Lou, I'm gonna get you. I hadn't thought about doing anything, let alone selling out. And rock and roll counted as selling out in Schwartz's mind because he hated the genre, particularly the lyrics. And despite this, Lou would salute his mentor by dedicating the Velvet song European Sun to Schwartz, simply because it was the track that both least resembled anything in the rock canon and also, at a scant 10 lines, contained the least amount of his hated lyrics. Sadly, Delmore Schwartz almost certainly never heard the song. Crippled by alcoholism and mental illness, he spent his final days as a recluse at the Chelsea Hotel, and he died there of a heart attack on July 11th, 1966, just 3 months after the Velvet Underground recorded European Sun, and nearly half a year before it was released. He had so isolated himself by this point in his life that Delmore Schwartz's body was in the morgue for 2 days before it was identified.
But there's a happy ending to this story.
Oh, is there? Oh.
Yes. Lou Reed believed that Delmore Schwartz later came back to haunt him or visit a house that he shared with one of his, I'm not sure if they were common law or truly married, Sylvia. Sylvia! I think that's Women off Blue Mask. Another just tremendous. Oh. Sylvia. Awful stuff. No, it's not. It's just that, oh man, that album just sounds so good. It's with Robert Quine playing guitar, and he and Lou make such a natural pairing, and then Lou comes in just like trumpeting his bullshit. Anyway, on My House off the Blue Mask, he professes that he believes his current home is haunted by Schwartz's ghost, singing, "Sylvia got out our Ouija board to dial a spirit. Across the room it soared. We were happy and amazed at what we saw. Blazing stood the proud and regal name Delmore." Just dog. Just bad writing. Also, it's one of his ones where he like abandons any traditional notation of meter to like sound like, I guess, Billie Holiday when he's singing it. So he's like, the way he actually delivers it is something like, "Blazing stood the proud and regal name Delmore." Like it's just such this. What a fascinating guy Lou was.
But we're getting far ahead of ourselves. Writing avant-garde soundscapes like European Sun was far off for good old Lou during his early 60s Syracuse days. This was a period when Bob Dylan was coming to the fore, and Lou started playing acoustic guitar and writing early songs, supposedly because electro-shock therapy made it difficult for him to concentrate on straight prose writing. So he kept it short, with melodies to jog his memory. That's so sad.
Yeah.
He wanted to blend his beloved street music, doo-wop and rock, with the gritty literature, grit-lit. Is that a term that he was reading?
It is now.
It is grit-lit? That's great. Tweet at us. Hashtag grit-lit.
Well, I mean, I wonder if the speed, if all the beats, because I don't know that has he talked about being influenced by any beat writers?
Well, he really was into Hubert Selby's Last Exit to Brooklyn and Burroughs' Naked Lunch.
Right.
Bizarrely, we've had it requested from multiple people to do a Naked Lunch episode.
Okay.
Yeah. We've had some we had a really sweet request on one of the Apple review comments, wanted us to do fried green tomatoes. Somebody else requested Con Air. We see your request. We thank you very, 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 very much. We're trying to get to them. We really appreciate it. It means a lot.
I especially see Con Air.
Do you want to do Con Air? We'll do Con Air. Yeah. So basically, Lou wanted to write adult rock and roll, which is a term I genuinely forget if I made up or if I took from him. I think it's actually a quote from him. Venus and Furs, for example, is taken from the title of a book by Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, from whom we get the term masochism, and who also happens to be the great-great-uncle of Marianne Faithfull. Did you know that?
Huh.
The guy who invented the term masochism is related to Marianne Faithfull.
Wonder if he was listening to her music at the time.
Oh. Broken English is a great album. Do you know that album?
I didn't.
It was like after she spent much of the 70s. I think she was living on the streets quite literally after she and Mick Jagger broke up and she really struggled with heroin addiction. She made this album at the end of the 70s called Broken English, and like her voice, which in the mid 60s was this very like crystalline, is that the term? Like very, like, I mean, she was literally just came from a convent and she sounds it. Now her voice is like grimy and almost sounds like Nico in a lot of ways. It's very fascinating. I mean, she clearly hit the whiskey and cigarettes very hard. It's interesting. It's a good album.
Well, I do love a sad story behind a record. BDSM loomed large on Lou's mind.
Thanks for reading that. That was a hard thing to say. BDSM loomed large on Lou's mind. That's like seashells level. When a friend started reading Lou's early lyrics, he eventually said, "Lou, what's the deal with all this degradation?" And Lou's indignant reply was, "If it's not dark and not degrading, then it's not sex. And you don't understand that because you're becoming a Republican." That's from the Todd Haynes movie of one of his old friends. I forget his name. Incredible. Lou's a quote machine.
He really is.
Inconsistent lyricist, quote machine.
God, he would have had an amazing podcast.
Was he like very active on Twitter?
No, I don't think so. I don't think he was active doing anything until, I mean, he was putting out like his Tai Chi meditations. He was just really into Tai Chi and like Laurie Anderson. And,
Wait, no.
And then he
last...
made Lulu.
No, the last thing he tweeted before he died was like a meme of Twilight Sparkle versus
right.
Metal Machine music.
Yes.
It's like My Little Pony.
I forgot if that was on Twitter or Facebook. Good for him. Reed also hosted a radio program while at Syracuse, which was recounted at the 2019 Syracuse Area Music Awards, or SAMA. Called Excursions on a Wobbly Rail, Reed's show and Reed were, quote, quickly fired for his esoteric playlist and on-air arguments with listeners. I wish those tapes existed.
Yeah, I know.
He also launched an underground campus literary magazine called Lonely Women's Quarterly, named after the Ornette Coleman composition. Huge influence on him. He was really obsessed with Ornette. And also some have claimed that Reed was dealing heroin while in college, and even employed his first serious girlfriend, Shelley Albin, to whom Pale Blue Eyes is dedicated, to make deliveries around campus. Lou has this history of getting women to work for him. I think one of his wives later took over as his manager. It's kind of weird.
Was he married to Laurie Anderson, or were they like common law or whatever the term is?
She was the only one that he was like respected.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
What?
I retract everything nice I just about her said. Laurie Anderson's recent body of work involves writing collaboratively with an AI generator stocked with the words of Lou Reed. Wow. Moving on.
You know, I mean, if she wasn't who she was to him, I would...
It would be grosser.
It would be grosser, yes. There's a whole agency that is doing this thing where when somebody dies, their family members are invited to like feed. I think you give them the late person's phone and any kind of information that like you have on them, and it supposedly generates like effectively a hologram that addresses
the exact plot of a Black Mirror episode.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Well, it addresses everybody at their funeral, and I think it's more for the people left behind as a way to like, you know, help process and get to say goodbye and have the person there to say goodbye. Maybe I don't know. So it makes me wonder what she's doing that for. Maybe she's not doing it for, you know, any kind of exploitative reason, but maybe it's something that's therapeutic for her in a way to still continue to work with him. I don't know.
That's fine. As you meditate on that, we'll be right back with more Too Much Information after these messages.
Well, Lou came out of college with a degree, a heroin habit, and hepatitis. Two of those things are helpful for a career in the music industry. For all of his insecurities, Lou seemed to have tremendous belief in his music. As an unknown, he visited a music publisher who asked him the standard question, you know, what do you see for yourself? His answer, I want to be rich and I want to be a rock star. And I'm going to be rich and I'm going to be a rock star, regardless of whether you handle my music or not. This is according to a friend who accompanied him to that meeting. No word on whether or not the publisher signed him. In any event, Lou's professional songwriting career began in the wake of the Beatles boom in 1964 when he was hired as a staff songwriter at Pickwick Records. Pickwick was a New York-based budget label which specialized in basically writing sound-alike versions of whatever was on the hit parade. While living at home with his parents, Lou earned the princely sum of $25 a week, aping chart toppers. He remembered in 1972, we just churned out songs, that's all. Never a hit song. What we were doing was churning out these rip-off albums. Songs of that period, like The Monkey and The Frug, were pretty asinine, so it stands to reason that rip-off versions of those songs were even more asinine. For example, when tasked with writing a carbon copy of The Twist, Lou cast his mind to the latest ladies' fashion trend, ostrich feathers. And thus he wrote the infectious dance track, The Ostrich, featuring the absolutely unforgettable opening line, "Put your head on the floor and have somebody step on it." And you say he's a bad lyricist.
I mean, it's funny. Actually, what came to mind when you're describing this process, I was like, he was basically an AI bot generating fake bullshit to flood the market and confuse people, just like what's happening on streamers everywhere now.
Yeah, but I mean, also, saying the quiet part extremely loud, it taught him the fundamentals of a pub. I mean, was that story about Hunter S. Thompson before he was writing novels when he was in like high school and early college? He would sit at a typewriter and write out The Great Gatsby and Faulkner or something just to feel what it felt like to type those words in that order and get the rhythm of that. I mean, as an act, it's pretty ridiculous, but in a way, I can imagine that you do glean something from that.
Yeah. I mean,
you're humoring me a lot in this episode.
No, I mean, I'm not comparing. I mean, I am comparing Lou Reed to AI, but it is just a hilarious, like, mercenary practice that was very real back then, and that he's one of the more famous people that came out of it that we got, you know?
But the song, The Ostrich, it had some moments of subversive brilliance in there. To compose the song, he tuned all of his strings on his guitar to the same note, which basically created a drone effect. In a 2004 Louder Sound interview, he explained, "I did that because I saw this guy called Jerry Vance, a Pickwick staffer, do that. Not an advanced avant-garde guy, he was just screwing around. And he didn't realize what he had, but I did, and I took that and made it into The Ostrich."
Come on, let's go. All right, everybody get down on your face, man. Get ready, Okay, come on. Hey, put your hands up, upside your knees, now do the ostrich. Hey, take this forward, you step on your head, now do the ostrich. All right, here we go.
Reed recorded the song with some studio musicians, and the marketing minds at Pickwick actually deemed it worthy of release. The single hit shelves under the name of a fictitious band called The Primitives and sold well enough that the label actually pressured Lou to put an actual band together and go out and promote the song at live gigs. And it was while searching for bandmates for this Primitives project that Reed first grew close to John Cale. They met at a Lower East Side house party where Cale's Beatle haircut caught Reed's eye, and so did his Welsh accent, which sounded close enough to the Beatles' Liverpudlian lilt to make him think, oh, this guy's probably a rock star. He was very, very, very mistaken.
That's so funny. He confused a Welsh and Liverpudlian accent. Yeah, shouts to John Cale as a style icon. Not only is he consistently the weirdest looking guy in any VU promo, like he was a cape at one point, I believe.
Cape, his Prince Valiant hair that, like, even at a time when Prince Valiant haircuts were semi-common, still looks super weird on him. And his soul patch these days is so strange.
It's ridiculous.
He's a strange man.
Yeah.
Yes.
Love him so much.
Yes. John Cale in 1964 was not a rising rock star. He was a rising star of the classical and avant-garde world. And he was new in town. The Welsh native came to America on a Leonard Bernstein scholarship for musical composition, a position he earned after interviewing with Aaron Copland. So he was a serious dude.
The funniest part about his entire musical upbringing is that he learned to play viola solely because every other instrument had been taken at his little Welsh school.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, his upbringing is so sad. Like, his dad moved in with his mother's family once they got married, I think. And they were all Welsh, and his dad was English, so they forbade English being spoken in their households. And
hell yeah.
Cale couldn't speak with his father because he didn't know English until he learned it in school as a 7-year-old. So until he was 7, he couldn't communicate with his own dad.
Yeah, that's
awful?
sad.
Yeah. And yet he's still better adjusted than Lou Reed.
Yeah, right.
John Cale moved to New York in late 1963 to pursue his musical studies and play viola with the avant-garde composer Lamont Young's Theater of Eternal Music. Oh, it's Lamont? Oh my God, I never knew that. Lamont Young's Theater of Eternal Music. He also knew the slightly more famous John Cage and was even photographed on stage with him around this period in the early 60s, which would help earn him some notoriety. John Cage is the ultra minimalist composer to the point that he has a famous piece called 4 minutes 33 seconds, which just consists of silence.
That is correct.
Doesn't get more minimalist than that.
Yeah, I mean, Cage is a fascinating guy. He was extremely racist. He was obsessed with the I Ching, and was like a big guy in not just minimalism but developing chance compositions, because a lot of his later on he would just throw coins from the I Ching and like I Ching, I don't know, let them determine like the shape of his compositions. But yes, he is most famous for 433. Yeah, sorry. We're edging into my territory now. So
No, wait, it's coming up. I got
I was watching you talk that with bated breath.
Reed was very intrigued by John Cale's background and asked him to join this ad hoc band to plug his crappy sound-alike song. Hey, wow, you've gotten co-signed by Leonard Bernstein and Aaron Copland, or this virtuoso. Do you want to play my crappy fake rock song?
It's funny because I think he met Cale. I mean, he met him at a party, but he probably knew him through Tony Conrad, who's another incredibly overlooked and groundbreaking. I mean, the guy was a musician. He was a mathematician. He made experimental films. He picketed outside the Lincoln Center for decades. Like, he was a really wild guy. And he was actually played on the Primitives. He played on the Ostrich. That's him on violin.
Oh, I didn't realize that. But Cale, he said yes, basically, because he thought it would be fun and an easy way to earn some money. But once he started rehearsing and Lou taught him about this sort of tuning technique on his guitar where all the strings were tuned to the same note, it kind of was like a real light bulb moment for Cale, because that was not that dissimilar to all the drone work that he was doing with Lamont Young. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of taken as a sign that they were on the same musical wavelength, and they started to become very tight, with Lou moving into John's $25 a month apartment at 56 Ludlow Street, one of the great crap holes of rock history, which I believe, according to a recent, or at least 10-year-old Wall Street Journal article, still houses artists to this day.
Wow.
I think Lady Gaga lived near there, too.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, now is the segue to get into the Lamont Young and his influence on the Velvet Underground, especially the first two records, because he was so directly important to Cale. Lamont is considered the father of minimalist music, but his work was more characterized by sustained drones rather than what we think of when we think about Philip Glass, Steve Reich, or Terry Riley, of like these repeating rhythmic figures or phasing experiments or small melodic cells that are being mixed and matched and overlapping. Monty was super into just extremely sustained tones. And the Theater of Eternal Music, or the Dream Syndicate, known by both, was a truly you had to be there thing that all of these different downtown New York artists talk about as being basically an incubator for all of the minimalist composers that would come out of that and help define that movement. And it was him, his wife, Marian Zazila, who designed the lighting for, I believe, the still in operation Dream House.
I went there.
And is it in Soho or Tribeca?
Tribeca.
Yeah. And their vocal guru, whose name is Pandit Pranath, and feature VU drummer Angus MacLeish. Cale was involved in that, and this guy Tony Conrad. And so they would basically just used like signal generators from like old military equipment, old radio equipment to create sine waves, and then they would just sing like incredibly in tune, precisely tuned notes, or and then have guitarists or I think Tony Conrad at one point was bowing a guitar, but like John Cale and Tony Conrad both amplified their instruments to compete with the sound of amplified voices. And they were intensely focused on pitch. Lamonti Young was really interested in, and still is, he's still alive, in this thing called just intonation, where in the Western tempered scale, we basically crunched the overtone series that occurs naturally when you hit a fundamental note into make it fit into the 12-tone series that Western music is based off of. And what that did was force the ratios of those overtone series out of sync with each other, creating uneven ratios. And this goes back to Pythagorean tuning and all this stuff where they're 3-2 or 2-3 at different points in the scale. And what just intonation does is it retunes any instrument. You have to retune an entire piano to this, to a system in which the relationships between those overtones are back to being completely even with one another. And you can also do it on fretless instruments because even though you can play Western tempered scale in tune on a fretless instrument, you can also play in just intonation. And it sounds weird. I would recommend everyone check out Lamonti Young's The Well-Tuned Piano, which is apparently a still being refined 6.5-hour piece where he just plays this enormous concert Bosendorfer, which is like a German piano that has like a full extra octave range at its bottom. And he just kind of noodles around in this just intonation, and it sounds like Martian music. It's really incredible. And Tony Conrad's part in that has actually been really overlooked. Because he was a mathematician, he was able to really define the frequency side of this in a way that Lamonti either didn't let on that he was able to or didn't know as much about as Conrad. And that's something John Cale has said, where he's like, Tony, because of his philosophical differences with Lamonti, was kind of written out of this narrative. But the idea of figuring out all this math stuff was largely because of Tony Conrad. And they would do these happenings or whatever, the Theater of Eternal Music, where they would just, for hours, just sit and focus on extremely in-tune singing pitches and bowed tones, and creating these drones, trying to tune their ears precisely to be able to stop what they call difference tones, like the oscillations that happen when two notes aren't quite exactly in tune with each other. They were trying to eliminate all of that. And they would go for hours on this. They drank hash milkshakes, which is a specialty of Lamonti's, and people would just come and go and just listen to this. And Lamonti was also a very accomplished saxophone player, which is interesting because you think about him being this father of these sustained static drones, but he was like, when you listen to Dream Syndicate stuff, Theater of Eternal Music, there's a different band called Dream Syndicate, at least some of the stuff that's been bootlegged and released, he's playing these wild, like Coltrane-esque scales, like all up and down over these drones. And you can actually hear that influence on Terry Riley, like stuff like Rainbow and Curved Air, all the little keyboard flourishes that Terry Riley bases his stuff on are very reminiscent of what Lamonti was playing in these settings. And the craziest part about it is that, aside from the fact that they played ungodly loud, Lou Reed would later quip when people said that Metal Machine Music, which is his guitar drone record based mostly on feedback, when people said that was hard to listen to or too loud, Reed would say, you should have heard the Dream Syndicate. And it's wild that none of this stuff is in wide release. Part of the big difference that Lamonti, the big beef that he has between him, John Cale, and Tony Conrad passed recently, is that Lamonti recorded all of this stuff. But he believes that it's his property, that he holds the right to the compositions. And Tony Conrad's whole thing was like, no, these were improvisations. You developed this tuning system, and the whole point of this based on my input. These should not be considered your copyrighted works. And so Lamonti won't officially release any of it while he's still alive, because he's demanding that Cale and I guess Conrad's estate or whoever relinquish their claims to these compositions. So you can only hear it in like the Todd Haynes documentary and some of these bootlegs, but it is really fascinating music, and particularly
in Dreamhouse.
What's that?
And in Dreamhouse installation.
Oh yeah, you can hear it in the Dreamhouse. Yeah, so if you're ever in Tribeca, check that thing out. It's like one of those things where people talk about going into it and being like, huh, this is weird, and then like coming to 4 hours later and being like, my God.
Yeah, that was exactly my experience. So I mean, just as somebody who kind of only dips his toe into this world, I feel like I can speak to people who are not super familiar.
Sure.
From I mean, it's basically this little walk up in Tribeca, and you go, up a couple floors, and it's like you're entering somebody's apartment, and you walk in, and it's just completely empty except for this very strange, almost purpley VU light. VU, huh? The windows are all covered up, and it's just this very almost eerie, ethereal light, and then there's this tone. And otherwise, the room's completely empty. I think it's just like white carpet and white walls. And what I was able to take from it was it's just this tone playing constantly. But after a while, you really do start to pick out different frequencies in the tone after you're there long enough. It's almost like the oral equivalent of a sensory deprivation chamber. If you've ever done a float tank, for example. Yeah. First you're bored and you're like, okay, I get it. And then you do sort of go away. And I don't know how much of it is based on beta waves, theta waves, whatever those those sonic sound waves are, where at a certain vibration it's supposed to calm you. Or I don't know how much of it is that at play, or how much of it is your mind, looking for shapes in clouds in the sonic sense, like how much you're just looking for other things. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was very interesting. I spent a lot longer in there than I ever thought I would. I feel like we were in there for like an hour and a half, 2 hours.
That's what I find so interesting about minimalist music, and especially this Velvet Underground record, which, as I mentioned, maybe is not my favorite Velvet Underground record, but I think it's the most fascinating mix of Cale's avant-garde stuff and Lou, the doo-wop songwriter for hire guy. But yeah, man, it's all about like trying to interrogate your relationship with sound. Really, is like if you distill things down to a single note or two or whatever, and just hold it for as long as possible. Like it's almost psychoacoustic. Like what is your ear gonna find in there? Because you reach a point. I think it might have been John Cage who said something like, "If you do something and it's boring, try doing it again for 90 minutes," because like. It really does affect the way that you are perceiving these sounds. It's just really fascinating stuff to me.
I mean, it's a slightly more drawn out version of like saying the same word over and over again until it starts to sound weird and just kind of decompose.
Oh man, have you ever heard "I Am Sitting in a Room"?
Wait, why do I know that? Is that Steve Reich? It sounds familiar.
No, it's Alvin Lucier, but it is a piece of sound art from around the same era. It's in 1969, and he just is narrating a text in an empty room and re-recording it over and over again. And because of the size of the room and its structure, the resonant frequencies end up changing with each subsequent overdub. Really fascinating stuff. Yeah.
And there would be, I mean, speaking of, you said John Cage's quote about, you think something is boring, try doing it over and over and over again. There's a piece that John Cale played of, I think it was John Cage's, where it was a fairly simple piano fragment that was to be played. It was written in the notation, just repeated some phenomenal number of times until you're playing it for 18 hours. Yeah.
I'm thinking of, there's also Lamonti composition that he made these sort of Dadaist compositions where one is just like composition number 6, like go draw a straight line and follow it. But like one of them is just a perfect fifth. It's a B and an F sharp. And it just says to be held for a long time. So people have taken that and run with it. I do it with guitars. I've done performances of it with guitars. People put like, we'll do it on piano with trying to prolong the sound for as long as possible. It's just, people ask me why, like, people are like, oh, this is boring, or like, why do you spend so much time listening to like one note or whatever? And I just think it's such a fascinating way to rewire your relationship with sound and then ultimately music.
Yeah, I mean, it's, in a way, there's two ways of looking at it, I think, and I haven't given any forethought into this. This is straight off the top of my head. I mean,
straight off the dome. Give it to me.
There's either you'd be amazed what you can find in that one note, which is my experience going at Dreamhouse and just hearing this tone, or it's like an oral fast where once it's over and you go back and you reintegrate into the world and the tone system that we know and the music that we're more accustomed to, it suddenly takes on a whole new flavor. You hear people who undergo fasts and it changes their relationship to food and their taste buds change. So, I mean, I guess there's two ways of looking at it. I haven't really been involved with it enough to, feel as though it changed my relationship to sound that much. But I'm sure that if I did it enough times, it might.
That's how it works, baby.
First one's free. Well, this is very fascinating. Thank you. I like when
of course,
when you teach me about one of my favorite aspects of this show is when you teach me about things that you're really passionate about that I really know very little about, because there's nothing more that I love than hearing somebody who's passionate about something that I know nothing about, because I love to hear. I mean, that's kind of the ethos of this show. Like, I love to hear what people are into and why, because I feel like, everything you could possibly think of, there's somebody who's obsessed with it. I think that's really cool.
I love the frequency side of things. I'm not good enough. I mean, thank you. I'm not good enough at math to like understand that much of it, other than the Reader's Digest version I just gave. But like Glenn Branca, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania native like myself, was this no wave composer and minimalist guy, sort of minimalist, because of course they drilled down into post minimalism afterwards. But he was doing this crazy with guitars, where he was like basically mutilating them and creating these giant like double-necked instruments, or just capoing them incorrectly at different harmonic points, and then getting like 12 people to play them at once, just like these aggressive single note strums. That stuff's really wild. And then, I mean, what got me into this stuff is actually a kid in college who shared with me Rhys Chatham's A Crimson Grail, which is not, maybe on streamers, but the most famous recording of it is with like, I want to say 400 guitars, but it might be one. He has staged performances of this piece with 1 to 400 guitars, electric guitars. And the thing I love about drone music, and particularly amplified drone music, is that even if you are, this goes into the thing about like hearing what's not there, or like your ear finding stuff, is that when you start stacking up these overtones with intense volume, that is really when you start to hear like angels singing and just being like, what am I actually hearing coming from these relatively simple sound sources? It's just, I don't know. I'm getting chills talking about it, because I just remember listening to that album for the first time really stoned and being like, what is going on? This is the divine music.
It's like musical magic eye. I mean, it really, like all of a sudden it just pops out.
Yeah.
But then if you think about it too much, you lose it, and you kind of have to like let it go. Yeah, no, I get it. I'm not, it's not something that I do with any level of frequency, but I understand it.
Anyway, good luck editing around all that. Lou Reed and John Cale's friendship. Go.
Adorable. Cale would say that Lou Reed was his first real friend in America, teaching him about literature and how to survive in New York. A tall order in 1964. John Cale repaid the favor by offering a crash course on avant-garde music and, more importantly, encouragement. It's like you and me. Cale later said that Lou was low energy at the time he first got to know him. That's his quote, because Lou was struggling with depression. Cale was somebody that Lou respected, so it meant the world that Cale liked his work. Lou had started to play Cale some of the songs he was writing, and specifically ones that Pickwick executives had no interest in. And the first of these that he played Cale was Heroin. And though Cale wasn't particularly interested in the acoustic, folky vibe of the song's early incarnation, he was drawn to Lou's highly literary, almost novelistic lyrics. They injected a dose of street realism into a music scene that was at that time infatuated with the British invasion and the California coast, and the Greenwich Village folk scene. Lou's words had to do with stark, everyday reality. In Cale's recollection, Lou's lyrics rejected the notion of Bob Dylan and Joan Baez's songs, which, in his eyes, had more to do with asking questions. Better to make a statement, Cale would say. Lou told Cale that Pickwick wouldn't let him record these songs, like Heroin, for obvious reasons, and Cale thought this was a tremendous shame. He would say, it kind of pissed me off. I said, let's just do it ourselves. Let's put a band together and go out there and play them. And that's where Velvet Underground started. So they holed up in the filthy apartment on the Lower East Side, which at that time was a neighborhood so rough that the landlord collected rent with a gun. The pair literally had no money, and they survived by finding wood in the street to burn for heat and throwing all the food they found into a communal bowl in the kitchen. That breaks my heart.
Sounds just gross.
Well, yeah, but it's kind of Dickensian. It's all over a twist.
True.
Yeah. John Cale felt safe with Lou, who was a local and, more importantly, a survivor. They spent a year rehearsing and developing their material, with Cale serving as an arranger, adding an experimental touch to Lou's more pop-centric, or at least melodic-centric songs. Well, sure. Both Lou and John Cale had immense gift for improvisation, and jams at their shared apartment would go on all the time. Surprisingly, they had a lot of success as buskers, performing Lou's songs in Harlem, but otherwise they made money by, checks notes, selling drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Time-honored tradition. Also, they were on welfare. It's important to note that most of your favorite mid-century art was made while all of these people were benefiting from a robust public endowment that was systematically gutted after they were able to do all this. And what was their rent again?
$25 a month, which was what Lou made a week at Pickwick. So,
yeah, sitting pretty.
Well, not really.
What was it, 1966, 67?
This was 65, 4 or 5.
Dollar inflation.
It's like $300.
$245.79. You might be lucky to pay that much for a toilet in New York that you could use all by your lonesome.
That's like half a parking spot.
That's true. That is, yeah.
Yep.
Good Lord. Anyway, moving on.
John Cale and Lou Reed brought guitarist Sterling Morrison into the mix after a chance meeting on the subway. Morrison and Reed had been classmates together at Syracuse, and after reconnecting on the public transit system, they decided to get together and jam. The trio rehearsed and recorded demos in the famous Ludlow Street apartment throughout the summer of 1965. And the name for this loose collective morphed from The Primitives, which was the band put together to promote the Ostrich single, to The Warlocks, which was also the Grateful Dead's early name, and then The Falling Spikes, which kind of rules, and I have to assume is a Heroin euphemism?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's got to be. Okay. Until they finally took their soon-to-be iconic moniker from a pulp paperback expose, and you have a fact about that I didn't know.
Oh, yeah. Supposedly, this was written by a journalist named Michael Lay. I didn't look into the rest of his work, but as I mentioned, or you alluded to earlier in another rant that Jordan will have extreme difficulty editing around, Tony Conrad had just found a copy of this book lying on the sidewalk, and it was this drummer Angus MacLeese, who is in the Theater of Eternal Music and would become the Velvet's actual first drummer, suggested that they go with the name.
Good name.
It's good. It's good.
Yeah. Well, this Angus MacLeese guy, once he helped them choose the name for the band, that was kind of the last good call he had. He departed the scene very quickly once the group got their first gig at a New Jersey high school because he was very, we'll say, bohemian, and he resented at having to show up at a specific time and place to play. And when he discovered that they'd be receiving money for their performance, he apparently quit on the spot, grumbling that the band had sold out.
It is really hilarious how people were so hardline about that stuff back then.
Yeah.
If only they knew.
Yes. So now, the Proto-Velvet Underground had no drummer, and they were desperate to fill the spot because they had a gig on the horizon. So Sterling Morrison asked his friend Jim Tucker if his sister Maureen, known to the world as Mo, was available. She was, and thus the classic Velvet Underground lineup was in place.
Yeah, Mo Tucker is a fascinating drummer. She played all of her drums just on their sides. She taught herself how to drum. Apparently, she was really interested, like many drummers, by Babatunde Olatunji's Drums of Passion, which comes up all the goddamn time if you ever read anything about drummers from the 60s. She didn't use a hi-hat. She didn't use cymbals. She used a mallet and a stick and just sort of rolled over these upturned drums. She was also apparently inspired as well by Bo Diddley, and in particular the Bo Diddley beat, which you can kind of hear that drumming pattern in her work with the Velvets.
Her lack of cymbals or hi-hats, how much of that was just like an economic necessity? Was that a choice, or was it like...
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say it was, I mean, I don't know anything about her early life, but like, you know, most kids, if they start playing in band, they start like just learning fundamentals on like snare or auxiliary percussion before they graduate to a full kit. And she maybe just assembled an ad hoc kit and just always played it the way that she wanted. It's cool.
It is. Meanwhile, things did not go well for the Velvet's first drummer, Angus MacLeish. Per his Wikipedia page, a heavy drug user who was never particularly mindful of his physical health, MacLeish died of hypoglycemia and pulmonary tuberculosis at the Shanta Baton Hospital in Kathmandu on June 21st, 1979, aged 41. The cause of death has been attributed to malnutrition. He was cremated to the traditions of the Tibetan Buddhists in a funeral pyre. Sounds like a lot of easily avoidable things.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
It sure does. That's what happens when you refuse to accept money.
Deviation from the norm will be punished unless it is exploitable.
Well, he tried to get out of it. He went all the way to Kathmandu, but you can't escape the West.
Velvets performed soundtracks for screenings of
I didn't know that.
experimental films. Yeah, they would perform live soundtracks for stuff by Piero Helixer and Barbara Rubin, and they, in fact, appear in Helixer's 1965 short film, Venus in Furs. Rubin, most known for her 1963 underground film, Christmas on Earth, became a devoted fan of the band through this connection and introduced him to their first manager, music critic Al Aronowitz, most famous for being the person who introduced Bob Dylan to the Beatles the year prior.
That was the famous occasion, according to legend at least, that Bob Dylan introduced the Beatles to pot, which has been disputed, but it's still a famous occurrence.
Indeed. And the rest. Aronowitz was a New York Post columnist by day and a manager at night, and he agreed to manage the Velvets. He paired them with the New Jersey garage rock band Middle Class, with a Y, whom he also managed, for a gig at Summit High School in Summit, New Jersey on December 11th, 1965. It won't come to anyone's surprise that suburban high school auditoriums, particularly in Jersey, were a less than ideal venue for a band with song titles like Heroin. As John Cale says in the American Masters documentary, "We were so loud and horrifying to the high school audience that the majority of them, teachers, students, and parents, fled screaming." Eventually, the Velvets wrangled a residency at Greenwich Village club called the Cafe Bazaar. Its name was somewhat optimistic, considering neither the owners nor the patrons enjoyed the sounds of the house band. Cale would say, "The joke was, we knew how good we were by how many people we drove out." The Velvet Underground attempted to compromise by adding some standard issue rock covers to their repertoire. As guitarist Sterling Morrison, who whips, described in a 1990 interview, "We got 6 nights a week at the Cafe Bazaar, some ungodly number of sets, 40 minutes on, 20 minutes off. We played some covers like Little Queenie, Big Bright Lights, Big City, the black R&B songs Lou and I liked, and as many of our own songs as we had." Sterling Morrison is just, again, lightning in a bottle with his lineup, you know, because he was obsessed with like Steve Cropper and Stax R&B Volt, and you hear that in his soloing and his playing. There's one moment, there's like a bend he does in Pale Blue Eyes that just like never fails to give me goosebumps. Yeah, man, and it's just he adds just another wow factor to the band of this like 60s R&B stuff. So anyway, after a few weeks, they could not stand this grueling set schedule, and Morrison later told Sluggo magazine, "One night we played the Black Angels' Death Song, and the owner came up and said, 'If you play that song one more time, you're fired.' So they opened their next set with it." You've also heard that it was maybe a prolonged version of Sister Ray, which equally disquieting.
Your mileage may vary.
Whatever the case was, the band were relieved of their post, but not before catching the attention of one Andy Warhol.
Yes, the pride of Pittsburgh, PA.
Baby!
He was never referred to as that. You know, his name was actually Andy Warhola. And when his name was printed once early in his career, they just dropped the A. I think it was like a printing error, and he just liked it. Do you know that?
No, I didn't. Warhola. Is that Polish?
I think it is, yeah.
Ugh. What did they say when Ted Kaczynski died? The Polish lost their last literary icon.
I've never heard that.
Yeah.
Who's they? You?
No, it's just something I saw quipping, a Twitter quip.
Already a prolific painter, sculptor, and filmmaker, by 1965, Andy Warhol sought to expand his famous factory empire into rock and roll. On the advice of factory confidant Paul Morrissey, the 37-year-old star of the art world, he is 1 year older than us when he discovered the Velvet Underground. That's okay. Moving on.
Things were easier back then. There were fewer people.
Fewer people.
There were.
More money, fewer people.
Yes.
He decided to drop in to the Cafe Bazaar and catch the Velvet Underground set, and he was so taken by what he heard that he impulsively extended an offer to act as the band's manager. Imagine being the Velvet Underground and Andy Warhol. What would the equivalent now be? I mean, like Banksy dropping in like a hoodie and a scream mask or something and being like, hey, you're really good.
Yeah, he comes to the gutter at 11:30 on a Wednesday, and he's like, "You guys are all right. I'll give you some money and amps and a place to work,
and I'll co-sign you whenever you want to do." Yeah,
we need to bring back patrons to the arts, man.
Yeah,
it's such a lost leader. Like, write off everything you could give to a band. Seriously, just fund a band for like 2 years, complete tax write-off. You'll never make your money back from it. Launder your money that way. Starting with me, and then a lot of other people. If anyone in the SF Bay Area knows any, crypto dorks or any of these losers, I will kiss their ass if they give me money, only to turn on them immediately.
So Andy Warhol agreed to be the Velvet Underground's manager, but this title would have rather loose connotations. He was basically their executive producer, financing their recordings and giving them spots at his exploding plastic inevitable multimedia art shows, which we'll touch more on later, and using his clout to get them deals. As far as shaping the Velvet Underground sound, however, the most he'd do was hector Lou to write more, tossing dozens of potential song titles at him as bait. I love this. Lou would later say, I'd come into the factory, and Andy would ask me how many songs I'd written. I'd say, I've written 10 songs. He'd say, that's one of my favorite things is all the interviews of the people in the Velvet Underground would do these withering impressions of Andy Warhol. It's hilarious.
Everyone's got one in their pocket.
Yeah. He'd say, it's like Lorne Michaels talking to all like Saturday Night Live vets. I'd come in and say, I'd written 10 songs. And Andy would say, oh, you're so lazy. Why didn't you write 15? Close? I could work on that.
Do you like Crispin Glover in the Oliver Stone Doors movie, or do you like Bowie as Warhol in the Basquiat movie?
I mean, there's this guy that I went to college with who basically sounded like a mix of, like, if you crossed Andy Warhol with Chris from Family Guy, and so he's who I'm doing now. You're so weird. It's all so weird. You're so weird. Everything was always so weird to him. So that's like who I hear now.
That's pretty good.
I can't do it. I'll
I think it's more
that.
effeminate than that.
Yeah. But Andy Warhol did make one significant alteration to the band's sound. Fearing that the Velvets lacked the requisite glamour to become stars, glamour was obviously very important to Warhol, he suggested the addition of a striking German model known as Nico. Perhaps most famous.
I love. I mean, yeah. Okay, sorry. I don't mean
funny.
to.
I don't much care for her.
Oh, really? I think she's so incredible. Have you listened to her solo stuff? Not Chelsea Girls, but like the goth ones.
Yeah.
Oh, they're so dark and incredible. That just, I mean, imagine that woman striding into a room anywhere. She's like 6 foot tall. The New Yorker once described her, quote, improbable bone structure. And then she just lets out with that voice. Like, what an incredible presence that must have been.
Yes. Do you have an interpretation of her voice for me?
These days.
Nico around this time was probably most famous for having a small role in the 1960 Fellini film La Dolce Vita. And she was also, did you know this? I did until researching this. She was the cover model on the 1962 Bill Evans album Moonbeams.
Yeah, it's the first album right after his musical soulmate, Scott LaFaro, died. And so Chuck Israels is playing on that, who is actually the guy who tutored Paul Simon in jazz theory and inspired him to come up with the chord changes to 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover.
That wasn't an invitation.
I was not giving you an opening there.
That was very, actually, funny story. As I mentioned or plug, you could say, on every episode we've done lately, one of the other shows that iHeart has me working on is the Paul Anka talk show, Our Way, and his co-host is this guy, Skip Bronson. And Skip Bronson's wife is Edie Baskin, who was the photographer on SNL for like 40 years throughout the show's beginning. Like all those incredible photos that are like tinted in the weird ways of like, how like cut the commercial break and all those pictures of the guests. Those are all her. Like she's super instrumental in like the look of SNL. She's like kind of a legend. She was dating Paul Simon, and that's who that song is
Poor
about.
Woman.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover is about leaving Edie Baskin.
Wow.
Yeah, I just learned that from her husband the other day. I don't know how out there that is, but that's apparently. I hope I'm allowed to share that. Sorry, Skip. So Andy Warhol tries to persuade the Velvet Underground to welcome Nico into their midst, and this proposal was not met with complete enthusiasm. Apparently, Lou was especially displeased. But she was eventually accepted, I'll say, into their ranks as a featured vocalist.
Was she, though?
Well, sure. We'll get there. Despite releasing versions of Gordon Lightfoot's I'm Not Saying in 1965, which features a young Jimmy Page on acoustic 12-string, Mo Tucker would say that Nico, quote, couldn't hold a pitch. Mm-hmm. And
she was half deaf. She had a perforated eardrum.
I'm half deaf. I can sing great.
You, Nico.
I don't want to hear it. In 1966,
war orphan.
In 1966, critic Richard Goldstein described Nico's vocal sound as I love this, like a cello getting up in the morning.
Writers really went ham on discussing her voice. I mean, Andy Warhol said it was like an IBM computer with a German accent.
That's also very good, yes. God, can you imagine if Kubrick had that as the voice of Hal in 2001?
I'm sorry, David. I cannot allow that.
I'm sure I could get some kind of like voice clone thing to do that now. Oh, that's so good. John Cale, for his part, would describe Nico as, quote, a blonde iceberg in the middle of the stage, surrounded by all of us in black. This is quite an image. Andy Warhol was so taken by her remote, aloof beauty that he initially pitched having her perform on stage with the band while in a plexiglass box. Gross, but also kind of great.
Yeah,
but also gross.
Both can be true.
Yeah, it's true. Lou Reed, for all of his resentment of Nico, would admit that they probably wouldn't have gotten the record contract if she wasn't so beautiful.
Yeah.
Nico's appearance on the debut album was basically a non-negotiable clause in the otherwise very generous management deal that Andy Warhol was offering the group. So Lou saw it as a very bitter pill that he simply had to swallow, hence her attempts to minimize her appearance on their debut album the second the ink was dry on their contract.
Yeah.
For example, when Andy demanded that Lou write a more poppy song for Nico to sing, Lou complied with Sunday Morning, only to sing the song himself, in what was, I take to be, an impression of Nico that I'm fairly certain was mean-spirited. And ultimately, Nico only sang 3 tracks on the album.
But man, I think All Tomorrow's Parties was one of the first Velvet songs that I heard, and I was just like, that was mind-blowing.
Well, that's a Wes Anderson. Wasn't that in Moral Tenenbaums? I feel like that was definitely in.
No, that's These Days.
Oh.
I've been out walking.
It's very good. It's
Thank
very
you.
good. Yeah. There was a time I could do a really good shiny, shiny. Now it just goes into Bowie. And I can't. Yeah, I can't do it. Who else
Lou's
we'll
tough.
talk about was a
Lou's tough.
a very
He's got
good.
a, he's got a.
Well, Lou in this era when he's trying to do the affected Euro.
Yeah.
I mean, he's basically doing Nico. Well, in more ways than one. Interestingly, both Lou Reed and John Cale would have affairs with Nico while she was in the band. Apparently at the same time. When I say same time, I mean, never mind.
They were perhaps overlapping weeks. Actually, interestingly enough, John Cale shacked up with Edie Sedgwick, speaking of Factory It Girls.
Oh,
they were together
wow.
for like 6 weeks as these things happened.
Oh, wow. Femme Fatale and I'll Be Your Mirror were both written in Nico's honor.
I'll be your mirror. That was really off key, but
just like her.
aw.
Yeah, I can't imagine that, considering how stormy Lou and John's relationship would be within 18 months of recording these songs. I can't imagine that this helped their relationship.
Yeah, I'm of two minds about Nico. On one hand, Nico innocent, like totally, constantly her whole life defined by her relationships with men, which we are about to do.
Yeah.
And like obviously tormented by her
Past and beauty.
not being taken seriously. Yeah. Her appearance was such a huge thing. And yeah, I mean, I really feel for her for that. But also, by all accounts, a racist and an awful mother. But, you know, in an effort to correct the thumbnail sketching that she often gets, because I just remember everyone being like, she was like a figurehead, and the band did their best work when they got her out of the way, and just her being completely short-shrifted. But she was a fascinating woman under her own right and did a lot of interesting work. So yeah, but she also had an incredibly tragic life that also reads like a who's who of 1960s cool. She was kind of like a sexy Forrest Gump traversing the landscape. She was born in Cologne in Germany, but moved to Spreewald Forest outside of Berlin to escape the World War II bombings of Cologne. Her father was conscripted into the Wehrmacht, and literally no one knows how he died. Various stories have him being put out of his misery by a commanding officer after he was shot by a French sniper, dying in a concentration camp, being hospitalized for shell shock, and later dying of psychosis. But when she moved back to Berlin, she was pretty immediately hired for work as a model, thanks to her striking height. I think she was 5'10", 5'11", and again, what the New Yorker called her improbable bone structure. Unfortunately, around this time, she was also allegedly raped by a black U.S. serviceman in Berlin, which people have mentioned as an excuse for some of her awful racism. But one biographer of hers kind of disputes the entire incident, saying that he went looking for records of this because the guy was supposedly hanged and could not find anything about the execution or indeed even the trial. Anyway, Nico parlayed her Fellini cameo in La Dolce Vita into a bigger role opposite French New Wave star Alain Delon, although she showed up months after shooting had begun and she had already been replaced. She then had an affair with Delon that supposedly resulted in the birth of her son Christian Harry Boulon, though Alain denied the paternity for his entire life. As I mentioned, Nico was not a wonderful mother. She pretty quickly abandoned the kid, and he was left to fend for it himself at one point completely. And Delon's mother and stepfather found him like alone in an apartment in like horrifyingly squalid conditions. Nico's contribution to his upbringing was, for example, to allegedly rub heroin onto his gums to calm him down when he was crying.
That's a waste of heroin.
And then later she just took it up to the next step and straight up injected him with heroin. They did heroin together. And then he overdosed on that in 2023 after a moderately successful career as a photographer. She met Bob Dylan in 1964 and had a short affair with him that produced the song I'll Keep It With Mine.
Oh,
and
I
then
like that song.
The year after, thanks to Rolling Stone Brian Jones, with whom she had an affair and got pregnant by, though she terminated the pregnancy, recorded the aforementioned Gordon Lightfoot cover.
Brian Jones, man, he was like one of the most notorious 60s womanizers, an era that really fostered quite a few womanizers. He had 5 children with 5 different women, all of whom he abandoned. Ultimately, he had so many children with so many different women that he thought it was perfectly fine to recycle names, naming 2 of his sons Julian.
God, Brian Jones sucks. It is hilarious how much, first of all, for the Brian Jonestown Massacre and all of their sins, and second of all, as a human. He was scared of her. That was the funniest thing. That,
Brian Jones?
That Cale and all of these other people mentioned about her was that, like, because he was a tiny man. He was barely 5'5", and so people would say she would like come into parties and swinging London, and Brian Jones would be like, "We'd better leave." So Nico next landed in New York, where she collided with Warhol and the Velvets, also having an affair post-Velvets with Jim Morrison. And this is mostly worth mentioning because Warhol was deeply in love with Jim Morrison and once gave him an ostentatious telephone, good band name, made of gold, according to the Oliver Stone movie, The Doors, so that he could talk to God.
He would later talk to God for real 2 years later in a bathtub in Paris.
Yeah, she wasn't. She maintained that she saw him the last day he was alive. Like she
Nico?
saw him she saw him in like driving by in a Parisian taxi and like waved him, but they didn't. And then he overdosed later.
Oh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Leonard Cohen fell in love with her around that time and wrote Joan of Arc, the closer to 1971's Songs of Love and Hate, about her. But their relationship is unrequited.
Which one was that song? Was it Love or Hate?
It was a love song. He was struck by her, and she did not reciprocate. Astonishing considering Leonard Cohen's reputation as a lady man and the fact that she slept with so many other men. Leonard did not make the list. She also broke a young Jackson Browne's heart. He had just moved to New York and was one of a succession of guitarists who backed her, including Tim Buckley.
Like Tim Hardin, too, right? Like Tim Hardin was another one?
I didn't find his name, but their brief affair did end up with These Days, which Jackson Browne wrote at like 17. It's one of the most incredible songs ever written, and which Nico recorded her indelible version of for her record Chelsea Girls. Although she hated the production on all of that. She was so pissed off when that was done afterwards. But her first introduction to Warhol was hilarious. She called him from a Mexican restaurant where she was fishing out the fruit from a pitcher of sangria and explained to him on the phone, "I only like the food that floats in the wine." And they talked for hours. After that.
Warhol's so weird. He's so weird. He really is, though. God. I wonder if that was the Mexican restaurant in the ground floor of the Chelsea Hotel, which I think has been there forever. I actually went on their website earlier today and tried to check this, and within 10 seconds, I saw prominent photos of Andy Warhol in 1966 at that restaurant, and also a prominent photo of a picture of sangria with lots of fruit. So maybe. I choose to believe it was there. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm fully aware that I'm doing exactly what I said was unfair to Nico, but it is hilarious. Among her other paramours were at various times French actress Jean Moreau and apocryphally Coco Chanel.
Oh, wow.
Although she didn't make a habit out of sleeping with women, one person who knew her said she just thought it was briefly trendy to be a lesbian.
Well, Coco Chanel would have been, Chanel died in, I think, 71.
Well, this would have been in the late 40s or early 50s when she was modeling.
Oh, okay.
Al Aronowitz, who had some just awful things to say about her in, I think, Please Kill Me. Possibly Jimi Hendrix. Definitely Iggy Pop, who claimed in Please Kill Me to have gotten his first SED from Nico. Also probably Serge Gainsbourg.
Yeah, oh my God, yeah.
And of course, most pertinent to this discussion, Lou Reed and John Cale. Sterling Morrison recalled in Please Kill Me, which is the oral history of the early days of punk, collected by Lakes McNeil. Nico would try and do little sexual politics things in the band. Whoever seemed to be having undue influence on the course of events, you'd find Nico close to them. So she went from Lou to Cale, but neither of those affairs lasted very long. There's also the famous incident in which she strolled into a Velvets rehearsal very late, and after being greeted by Lou, I think it's Cale who recalls this, Nico simply stood there. You could see she was waiting to reply, in her own time. Ages later, out of the blue, came her first words. "I cannot make love to Jews anymore."
That's going to be my text notification from you from now on. Tweet at us at...
Yeah. Nico's prejudices ultimately forced her exit from New York post-Velvets. There was a famous 1971 incident recounted by Danny Fields, among others, who was a friend of hers, and the Ramones manager, right?
Yeah, he was like a big punk scene stir. I think he was a PR guy. I think that was his thing. Like he introduced Bowie to Iggy Pop during Bowie's first New York trip. And...
that wasn't an invitation. I just know the Ramones have a song called Danny Says. Right. It might be about a different Danny.
No, he is the one that is involved. I don't know what his title was, but he was involved with the Ramones, yeah.
So, at a dinner in 1971, Nico struck a black singer and activist named Emeretta Marks in the face with a glass or bottle. The wound needed multiple stitches, and Nico said, doing so, "I hate black people." One of her biographers suggested that she prefaced the attack by saying, "You don't know about suffering," and that she had become incensed by the suggestion that a black American could compare their experience with oppression and so forth to hers in wartime Germany. Just going to leave that one right there.
That's a fun minefield, yeah.
Yeah. Supposedly fearing retribution by the Black Panthers, Nico fled to France, where she fell heavily into heroin addiction while dating French New Wave director Philippe Garrel in the 1970s. The incident did not make her more enlightened. Island Records dropped her after learning of racist comments that she made in an interview, which she summed up as, charmingly, "I said to some interviewer that I didn't like negros. That's all. I don't like the features. They're so much like animals." Awful, awful stuff. Nico did release a stretch of solo albums. Her post-Chelsea Girls record, The Marble Index, was produced by Kale, and the oppressive, icy atmosphere by this, which is, that voice accompanied by a droning harmonium. But she was supposedly, Jim Morrison was like a booster of hers. He was like, go record your own stuff, like do this, blah, blah, blah. There's this hilarious picture of her in Saint-Tropez with like these two people out on like a chaise lounges out in the sun, and then her all in black under an umbrella. I think he also told her to stop dyeing her hair blonde. People have called these records like early goth music, essentially. They are a hard listen, but pretty powerful stuff. By the 80s, she was living in Manchester, basically penniless, just doing a bunch of tour dates wherever she could. I believe the famous quote about her time in Manchester is that she only owned her drug paraphernalia, a pair of leather boots, and like her clothes at any given time. And so she was sort of considered an elder stateswoman of the Manchester scene, actually, which is kind of funny.
So this would have been early 80s. So this would have been like
right
New
around the
Order,
Manchester
Hacienda.
scene.
Wow, that's so weird.
But yeah, there's a documentary about her from this time that, or there's a dramatization about her at this time that I forget the name of, but I watched, and there's a very interesting part in it where she talks about, and I think from a real life interview where she's like guzzling limoncello at breakfast and just like shoveling in pasta because she was trying to destroy her looks because she was so desperate to be taken seriously as a composer. At one point she said, as a musician, men wrote the songs and I sang them. So she was trying to get out from under that she just wanted her appearance to be a complete non-issue, and she just like fully stopped taking care of herself. She was, obviously on speed throughout the 60s, as everyone was, but she just drank a lot, ate a lot of food, and did a bunch of heroin. Eventually, she did get clean and took up cycling as a way to stay healthy after getting clean in the 80s. And then she took her bike to go buy weed while vacationing with her son Ali in Ibiza when she fell and hit her head. She was unconscious and rejected from 4 different hospitals. The last one misdiagnosed her condition as heat exhaustion since it was the hottest day of the year, and she died of a cerebral hemorrhage stemming from that accident in 1988 at the age of 49. No one from her New York life attended her funeral or even replied to her manager when informed of her death.
That's cold.
I just find her such a fascinating woman, man. I mean, she's a tremendous artist, fraught by all this male-coded, but also a manifestly awful woman in certain ways. But back to 1966. Spinning newspaper, smash cut. Nico, the headline of the New York Times. Nico, still young and heroin free.
And Lou Reed probably has a fully functional liver, and John Cale wasn't his mortal enemy and still had weird hair. I call this section ring, 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 banana gramophone. Because it's the Banana album, and a gramophone's a record.
Yeah.
Come on, that was really good. That was the best I had in this.
Sweat my damn tits off out here.
Up and down the court, night after night, carrying your ass.
We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with more Too Much Information in just a moment.
Back to 1966, now billed as the Velvet Underground with Nico. Andy Warhol incorporated the band into his series of multimedia performances dubbed a truly incredible name, The Exploding Plastic Inevitable. I love that.
It
was a marriage of underground music, film, dance, and lights. Also assisting with these performances was the 27-year-old Norman Dolph, an account representative at Columbia Records who moonlit as a DJ and sound man. He would say, I operated a mobile discotheque, if not the first and at least the second one in New York. I was an art buff, and my thing was that I'd provide the music at art galleries for shows and openings, but I'd ask for a piece of art as payment instead of cash. That's smart. That's how I met Andy Warhol. By the spring of 1966, Warhol decided it was time to take his charges into the recording studio, but knowing little about such matters, he sought out Dolph for advice. As Dolph recalled in Sound on Sound, when Warhol told me he wanted to make a record with those guys, I said, oh, I can take care of that, no problem. I'll do it in exchange for a picture. I could have said I'd do it in exchange for some kind of finder's fee, but I asked for some artwork, and he was agreeable to that. Dolph was tasked with booking a studio, covering a portion of the costs himself, co-producing, and leaning on his colleagues at Columbia to ultimately release the product. For his trouble, he was given one of Warhol's silver Death and Disaster series canvases. He would say, a beautiful painting, really. Regrettably, I sold it around 75 when I was going through a divorce for $17,000.
Oof.
I remember thinking at the time, geez, I bet Lou Reed hasn't made $17,000 from the Velvet Underground album yet. If I had it today, it would be worth around $2 million. I'm not quite sure when this interview was done, but I would say that figure has probably doubled.
Wouldn't you be a little, like, I would be kind of pissed if I got an Andy Warhol original, because wasn't he just into his, like, reproduction phase at this point where it could have been made by someone else's hands entirely? And he's like, here, thank you. Or, I can't do it. But I'd be pissed. I'd be like, what, did you have an intern do this? Like, thanks, man.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, you know what? A, it's how it looks, and if he liked how it looked, great. And
Sure.
B, that the stuff retains its value. So in a way, it doesn't really matter. Man, there was this vintage store up the street from me on Montrose called Ollie Oxenfree, and it closed. And for years, they had a original Warhol print. It was a poster that he had done for some event in the early 70s, or might have even been late 60s. And I got the whole rundown on it, and they offered to put me in touch with the old, Greenwich Village-ite who gave it to them to sell, and they were acting as the broker for. And I always went in and I always thought about getting it. It was always a little more money than I had at the time. And now I really wish I'd gotten it because, it was so cool looking. And it was just, have a Warhol. And they were like, very happy to put me in touch with like the guy who obtained it from Warhol personally. Oh, I still think about that. So yes, unfortunately, the co-producer, we'll say, of the Velvet Underground debut passed up his chance for points on the album for a Warhol painting that he sold in the 70s way too early for a minuscule fraction of what it's worth today. That is not the only financially questionable decision this guy made regarding memorabilia acquired during this period. Norman Dolph apparently gave away his original acetate recording of the Velvet Underground debut. It resurfaced decades later at New York's Chelsea Flea Market, where it was purchased by a collector in 2002 for 75 cents. The collector sold it on eBay in December 2006 for 25 grand. And I can only imagine what it's worth now.
Jesus
and thus
Christ.
concludes our Belongs in a Museum segment for this episode. Norman Dolph's big contribution to the Velvet Underground sessions was that he found the studio to record the album. His day job at Columbia meant that he worked with a lot of smaller label imprints, including Scepter Records, who released records by people like the Shirelles and Dionne Warwick. Their small midtown offices boasted their own recording facility. Hilariously, this same building at 254 West 54th Street would later house Studio 54. So there's a lot of history in that building. This is like the Ramones recording upstairs at Radio City.
Hilarious.
Yeah. The Velvets might not have known a lot about recording studios at this phase. They were very much novices, but they knew enough to know that this place was kind of a dump. In the liner notes to the Peel Slowly and See box set, Lou Reed describes the facilities as, quote, somewhere between reconstruction and demolition. The walls were falling over. There were gaping holes in the floor, and carpentry equipment littered the place. John Cale recalls being similarly underwhelmed in his 1999 autobiography. The building was on the verge of being condemned. We went in there and found that the floorboards were torn up, the walls were out, and there were only 4 mics working. But it was here, over the course of just 4 days in mid-April, the exact dates are disputed, that they recorded the bulk of their debut.
One of the funnier things that I was reading, I was like, ooh, mic placement, trying to get real nerdy about it. And they were like, we set up the microphones where there weren't holes in the floor.
Yep. They recorded the majority of their debut here. Heroin, I'm Waiting for the Man, and Venus and Furs were re-recorded in Hollywood.
At a studio frequented by Frank Zappa, which is funny.
Oh, we'll talk about that later. Yeah, their mortal enemy, Frank Zappa. And Sunday Morning was tackled at New York's Atlantic Records studio that November when the release date for the album got pushed back. So that was a late edition. The cost for this album isn't known definitively. Estimates vary from $1,500 to $3,000 or $15,000 to $30,000 in today's dollars. That's hilarious.
Oy.
So this Norman Dolph guy was the co-producer engineer, let's say. He was actually the guy who, knew how to use recording equipment. But Andy Warhol was, at least on paper, the producer. Let's talk about Andy Warhol, producer.
Just wandering into the studio looking at shiny things.
Wow. Oh, no, that's...
That was walking.
Yeah, I know.
Andy may have returned to the building a lot a decade later when it housed Studio 54, but he was somewhat scarce during the recording of the album that he was nominally co-producing. In reality, he approached his role more like that of a producer of a film, raising the money and hiring a crew to do the actual work. On the rare occasions he did attend the sessions, Reed recalled him sitting behind the board gazing with rapt fascination at all the blinking lights. Of course he didn't know anything about record production. He just sat there and said, "Ooh, that's fantastic." The band would later part company with Warhol on less than friendly terms. Reed would fire him as their manager after the album's release because he was sick of being overshadowed. Though Warhol's other lasting contribution was securing equipment for the band, including the Vox amps that were known as the Super Beatle amp. Imagine a weirder pairing than the Beatles and Velvet Underground. Actually, I'm sure the Beatles would have fronted and been like, "Well, this is such interesting advanced stuff that you're doing."
I've never heard them talk about the Velvet Underground. Of all the Beatles minutiae.
Not even for clout chasing purposes?
Yeah, and Paul would have been the one because he was so into John
Albert
Cage.
Iver.
And I don't recall ever hearing them talk about him. Huh.
Anyway, at the time, the Velvets were more or less content with his role as manager-producer. As Reed reflected in 1986 on an episode of The South Bank Show, the advantage of having Andy Warhol as a producer was that because it was Andy Warhol, engineers would leave everything in its pure state. They'd say, "Is that all right, Mr. Warhol?" And he'd say, "Oh, yeah." So right at the beginning, we experienced what it was like to be in the studio and record things our way and have essentially total freedom. They would say that Tom Wilson, who produced Bob Dylan and about 100 other things at this time period that you love, was more of a producer than Warhol ever was, while Cale acted as the arranger. The Velvets and Tom Wilson would reteam for White Light, White Heat, and Cale later said of Wilson's work, the band never again had as good a producer as Tom Wilson. There was the Andy Kaufman-esque suggestion that Warhol made for the delicate "I'll Be Your Mirror" that was never implemented. Reed recalled, "We would have the record fixed with a built-in crack, so it would go, 'I'll be your mirror, I'll be your mirror, I'll be your mirror.'" So that
you gotta do it like her.
I'll be your mirror, I'll be your mirror.
That's all I'm
So
saying.
that it would never reset. It would just play and play until you came over and took the arm off. Hilarious. The band were also huge dicks to Nico while recording this track, which is sad considering the title was something that she reportedly said to Lou Reed. Again, just imagine that woman, 6 feet in heels, coming up to you and saying, "I'll be your mirror."
So it sounds a little like Arnold there.
It was dipping into it. Yeah. Arnold as singing Nico songs is pretty hilarious. What costume will the poor girl wear to all tomorrow's parties? As Sterling Morrison would later explain, Nico kept singing "I'll Be Your Mirror" in her strident voice. Dissatisfied, we kept making her do it over and over again until she broke down and burst into tears. At that point, we said, "Oh, try it just one more time, and then it. If it doesn't work this time, we're not going to do the song." Nico then sat down and did it exactly right.
Exactly right. I don't like that.
In Please Kill Me, Warhol would recount, "The whole time the album was being made, no one seemed happy with it, especially Nico. I want to sound like Bob Dylan," she wailed, so upset because she didn't. You get it.
So that's a little background on "I'll Be Your Mirror," one of Lou's best poppy tracks on the record. And, we touched on this earlier. It's easy to forget that for all of Lou's lyrical taboos and fascinations with drones and punky four-on-the-floor rhythms, his time at Pickwick and the Velvet's early apprenticeship as a cover band made him preternaturally good at writing pop songs. The album opens with Sunday Morning, with Lou taking over Nico's planned vocal lead, and there's a bass slide there that pays tribute to the Mamas and the Papas' recent hit Monday Monday. Sunday morning, Monday Monday. It's all related. There are layers here. Sunday Morning was Sunday Morning was written about dropping in on their friend at 3 a.m. after a night of boozing, John Cale told me when I actually interviewed him for a track-by-track commentary piece I did for People for the 50th anniversary of this album in 2017, which
there it
is still one of the coolest things that People ever let me do. Props to my editor, Sarah Michaud. The guy they dropped in on happened to have a guitar and a harmonium. It was kind of manic, Cale added to me. I like saying that. To me. John Cale told this to me. Anywhere you'd go at that time, if you saw an instrument, you'd just pick it up and start playing. Lou saw the guitar, I saw the harmonium, and off we went writing Sunday Morning. There She Goes Again also draws from the top 40 well, borrowing a guitar part from Motown, which I never noticed until I read this. As Cale admitted to Uncut in 2012, the riff is a soul thing, Marvin Gaye's Hitchhike, with a nod to the Impressions. I want to splice that in here.
Chicago, that the last place my baby stayed. Yeah.
There she goes again. She's out on the streets again.
There She Goes Again would earn the distinction of becoming one of the first Velvet Underground tracks to ever be covered half a world away in Vietnam. Do you know the story? This is insane.
I did not know.
So a group of U.S. servicemen performing under the name The Electrical Banana during their off hours were sent a copy of the Velvet Underground and Nico by a friend who thought they would appreciate the fruit on the cover. Electrical Banana album. Electrical Banana was, I assume, taken from a line from Donovan's Mellow Yellow. You know, electrical banana, gonna be a sudden craze, which is, I believe, to be a reference to the brief urban legend from the mid-'60s that you could smoke banana
peels. Yeah.
Zero truth to that whatsoever. So anyway, these GIs in Vietnam, in the jungle, hear the Velvet Underground and Nico and really like it.
And think, this is what we're fighting for.
Yes. And they resolved to record a version of There She Goes Again right there in the jungle. They build a makeshift studio by tossing down wooden pallets and pitching a tent and fashioning mic stands from bamboo branches and plugging their amps into a gas generator. And it used to be on YouTube. I'm going to check and see if it is. I want to plug it in.
Street again. She's down.
So that's weird. And from Vietnam vets, it's a quick jump to...
Appropriately, Heroin. It's one of the oldest compositions on the record. It dates back to Lou's time at Syracuse. Lou had actually attempted to record this song during his days on the pop assembly line at Pickwick. A demo
That's
from 1965 was rediscovered in 2022 by Lou's widow, Laurie Anderson. There's another home demo made with Cale and Morrison in Reed's Ludlow Street Loft later that summer, which sounds more similar to the final version. But I actually quite like the country blues talking kind of version. Yeah,
I'm gonna splice that in here.
You should.
Just where I'm going. I'm gonna try for the kingdom if I can, 'cause you know it makes me feel that I'm a man. When I put the spike into my vein, then you know that things aren't quite the same. when I'm rushing from my run, and I feel like Jesus' son, and I guess that I just don't know, and I guess that I just don't know.
They'd lock me in a room and they'd say, write 10 surfing songs, Reed told WLIR in 1972. And I wrote Heroin. And I said, hey, I got something for you.
It's so funny.
They said, never going to happen, never going to happen. With Warhol now bankrolling Lou's artistic endeavors, they were free to do whatever they wanted, which included the taboo subject matter and the chaotic breakneck ending. The end of the track actually got so cacophonous in studio that Maureen Tucker actually stopped playing because she thought they were finished. She says in the 2006 Velvet Underground Under Review documentary, no one ever even notices this, but right in the middle, the drums stop. No one ever thinks about the drummer. They're all worried about the guitar sound and stuff. Nobody's thinking about the drummer. Well, as soon as it got loud, fast, I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't hear anybody. So I stopped, assuming, oh, they'll stop too, and say, what's the matter, Mo? And nobody stopped. So I came back in. Many people have misinterpreted Lou's chillingly neutral, clear-eyed depiction of drug use as an endorsement, and in later years, fans would approach the band at gigs to tell them that they too shot up heroin. This deeply disturbed Lou and made him somewhat hesitant to play the song with the band through much of the band's later career. Heigl would later say, these songs aren't about drugs, they're about guys who are sick.
Wow, that's a pretty stark, stunning. Was Heigl ever into heroin? I don't think so.
He seems too weird.
Yeah. I can't imagine the guy who did Paris 1919 could ever...
Yeah, coke.
Well, that makes sense.
Oh, Heigl? No, I was wrong. Heigl did use heroin in the early days, but later switched to coke and booze.
A true
And
Welshman.
Yeah, I was going to say. Speaking of heroin, now we have to segue into I'm Waiting for the Man, a song about scoring $26 worth of heroin in Harlem. Reed would later say of it, everything about that song holds true, except the price. It's not working. It's too record executive. I don't have the Brooklyn thing down. It's like my Pano friend Donald says.
Stick a fork in their ass.
They're done. That has some very stupid lyrics on it, that record, New York. Just an incredible record, but also has a song about killing the last great American whale with a rocket launcher.
Yes, and beginning of a great adventure is a beautiful song about father.
I forgot how much that song sucks.
What?
That's the one where he talks about raising an army of weird kids to combat how boring like everything else is and training them like a sleeper cell. And it also has one of my favorite Lou prompts where he goes, "Take it, Lou," and then plays a really blues solo.
Wait, so he calls to himself?
He does. He sure does.
That's great. I told you my dad did a whole illustration series on There Is No Time. One's over my bed right now. Now we got to talk about European Son. It's got another quote from John Cale when I interviewed him in 2017. He had this very hilarious anecdote about that song. European Son, in my mind, was purely for inspiration. Whenever we played anywhere, we couldn't wait to get to the point where we'd improvise and do European Son. It was always different. That was the fun part for us, doing those improvisations. And those improvisations would really get the best out of us in the end, because they go on and on and on and on. We'd be up there for an hour just improvising before we'd even get done a song. In San Diego, we did that. That's the kind of rep we had when we got to San Francisco and LA. Bill Graham didn't appreciate all the songs and improvisations that were going on. He thought we were invading the San Francisco group's territory. There wasn't much love lost between us and the West Coast. Lou was always talking about, never mind the flower children, give us the hard drugs. We were happy that Woodstock ended up in mud. That kind of resentment was very healthy, I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. John also talked to me about All Tomorrow's Parties, which is a song that Lou would describe as, quote, a very apt description of certain people at the factory at the time. The factory being Andy Warhol's studio.
Not the tire factory.
No. No. Not the, wasn't there a club, The Factory?
Oh, yeah, that was or you think of Factory Records, the Hacienda.
Oh,
no, there was a factory. That was like a dance. I think that was like a dance queer
yes.
place. Okay.
Yeah.
Straight white guys. Killing it.
Lou would say All Tomorrow's Parties was a, quote, very apt description of certain people at the factory at the time. I watched Andy watching everybody. I would hear people say the most astonishing things, the craziest things, the funniest things, the saddest things. So it's a song about observation. John Cale, in particular, was proud of the treated piano on all Tomorrow's parties, a move that I want to assume so badly
Nope,
was
sure
borrowed
wasn't.
from Brian Wilson
Absolutely
on the
not.
Pet Sounds track, You Still Believe in Me.
Was not 100% not. Prepared piano dates far further back than Brian Wilson, if you can believe it.
Oh, Cale told me, I'm going to get my cred back. Cale told me, we made the arrangement for all Tomorrow's parties before Nico came along. That was the result of a year of weekend work, sitting around on the weekend and just playing and playing and playing and playing until you slowly, gradually moved out of the folk music side of things. The Velvet Underground debut record was all done with just us playing. There were no effects involved in that. We tried a version where Nico doubles her vocal, but the vocal just became too heavy. Yeah, two Nicos is too much.
A lot.
But the noise of putting paper clips in between the strings of the piano gave it a ring that made it a little more orchestral. We were trying to make orchestral stuff. This is very interesting to me. We were trying to be Phil Spector, really. Phil Spector would mix Wagnerian orchestrations with R&B. That was a really unique combination. We had the drone. The viola wasn't used, so the piano became the drone. Whenever we try to do something, we'd always try to find something that would be the drone.
I love the piano part on that. It was just such a otherworldly sound. Like the first time I'd really heard the instrument played like that. You know,
Yeah.
just hearing that at like 14 or whatever. Cale's viola at this time was deeply bizarre. When he was in the Theater of Eternal Music, Tony Conrad showed him how to install a pickup on it so it could be amplified to keep up with the noise of the rest of these sessions. And Cale explained that to Rolling Stone. It was very abrasive. I wish I could do an accent for him, but all I can think of is Waldo Jeffers had reached his limit. Just him doing the gift. He said it was very abrasive, and the pickups we had then were really not terrific. They had a lot of noise. It was a good racket. I've also heard him compare it to the sound of an airplane taking off. And then Cale gradually messed with it even further. He used guitar, banjo, or mandolin strings because he was trying to get it deep and as deep as possible. And he also filed down the bridge so that he could play drones using 3 strings on the viola. Like, you know, normally on a string instrument, the bridge is arched so that at the most you can play what they call double stops or 2 notes at once with the bow because the strings don't sit flat. And same way on a guitar, they're slightly arched when you look at the tailpieces of like electric guitars. So he essentially broke his instrument so that he could play drones on 3 strings, and later said that it was ruined. You can't do very much after that with the instrument, but it's a great noise. And by the time he was done using it in the Velvet Underground, I think it had gotten so unwieldy with all of these other instrument strings and the detuning and all this that he was using a cello bow to play it at that point.
Yeah, didn't you describe the sound of the viola drone as like a B-52 coming in for landing or something?
Yeah.
I love that. And he's not wrong.
Nope.
It can be a tough listen at some point. Yes.
I mean, again, you should have heard the Dream Syndicate.
Yes, you know. All right, sorry. One more John Cale anecdote. I'm so thrilled
he told
to talk
you.
to him. That he told me, Jordan Runtagh, for People Magazine in 2017 for the 50th anniversary of the Banana album. Speaking about femme fatale, John Cale told me. Sorry, I'll stop. Andy Warhol saw that Lou was moping around the factory, and he gave him a list of words. He said, I wish I could do a Warhol voice. Here are 14 words. Go write songs with these words. And Lou was never happier. He had a task in hand, and he sat down. That was a lot of fun for him. We had our own thing going before Warhol, but he showed up and was more of a guy helping us not forget who we were. Andy would always say things like, tell Lou, don't forget to put little swear words in that song. He was reminding us of who we really were. I like that. And that really is, like we said, Warhol's biggest gift to this production. Apparently, the title Femme Fatale came from Andy asking Lou about factory superstar Edie Sedgwick, who, as you mentioned, John Cale had a 6-week relationship with. Andy said, oh, don't you think she's a femme fatale, Lou? I thought that song was written about Nico, but guess not.
She's a femme fatale.
She was always really pissed off about how, American they pronounced that word because she, French was a language she spoke. It wasn't her native language, but close to it. And there's some quote from Lou where he's like, Yeah, I wrote this one. I'm going to say it how I want. Sorry, Nico.
What an asshole. Warhol's involvement with the band's music was iffy, but the visual art was naturally his purview. And bored by the static images that album art had been relegated to, he devised a peel-away sticker of a pop art banana illustration, under which would be a peeled pink and notably phallic banana. Aside from the fine print above the sticker, helpfully urging buyers to peel slowly and see, the only text on the stark white cover was Warhol's own name, gracing the lower right corner in stately coronet bold, a literal cosign of the Velvet Underground. The fact that each cover was essentially a Warhol original print was a big selling point to Verve, the MGM subsidiary that had purchased the distribution rights. Columbia declined, so did Atlantic and Elektra, citing reasons ranging from loose lyrics to the sound of Cale's viola. Verve, meanwhile, had no such objections and spent a fortune on a special machine capable of manufacturing the sticker. Most reissued vinyl editions of the album do not feature the peel-off stickers, and original copies of the record with the peel sticker feature, with the sticker on or not on, as I understand, are rare collector's items. Hilariously, it was the relatively standard back cover that would cause far more headaches for the Velvets. The photo depicted the band in the midst of an exploding Plastic Inevitable performance at Norfolk, Virginia's Chrysler Art Museum.
I think John Waters was at that gig. He at least he was in the Todd Hayes documentary, and I think he said he was. So that's kind of nuts.
Yeah, that's about right. I think, Baltimore's not that far of a drive.
True. I don't know. It's just weird that John Waters is like presumably in the background of that photo in the back of the Velvet Underground debut. I just think it's cool. That's neat. A neat little fact, and that's kind of what we do here.
Kind of our old thing. Let's just listen to you let you try and fill dead air. There was a slide montage that was projected onto the stage during that gig. That was the whole point of the multimedia shows, and the upside-down image of actor and factory associate Eric Emerson from Warhol's Chelsea Girls film could be seen. Emerson had been recently busted for drug possession and was badly in need of money, which probably explains why he threatened to sue the label for the unauthorized use of his image to the tune of $500,000 in 1967 dollars. Rather than pay Emerson his claim, MG simply stopped production to remove the offending image. Copies of the record were recalled in June after being released in March 67, which doomed its commercial potential. Sterling Morrison would later say, "The whole Eric business was a tragic fiasco for us and proves what idiots they were at MGM. They responded by pulling the album off the shelves immediately and kept it off for a couple of months while they fooled around with stickers over Eric's picture and then finally the airbrush. The album thus vanished from the charts almost immediately in June, just when it was about to enter the top 100. It never returned to the charts." Narrator voice, "It never came close to entering the Billboard Top 100. It peaked at... Hey, let him live, man. Sterling Morrison. It peaked at 171. And the front cover also eventually yielded a lawsuit of its own. Per Wikipedia, in January of 2012,
This is so dumb.
the Velvet Underground Business Partnership, of which John Cale and Lou Reed were general partners, sued the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, Inc., in the United States District Court for the Southern District of New York after the foundation licensed the cover's banana designs for use on a line of iPhone and iPad cases. The court dismissed without prejudice the partnership's request. That's kind of like, nice try, but no.
Yeah, it's like game respects game, but no. Oh, I just saw a friend of the pod, Dora, is in the middle of reading Chaos about the CIA's connection to Charles Manson.
Hell yeah.
Just want to plug that book and our friend Dora. Thanks, Dora. It's also worth noting that the album flopped due to its being banned from both radio and record stores because of its racy lyrics. That's the word I'll use, racy. I'm sure Lou would love that I called his lyrics racy. And also, many magazines refused to carry advertisements for it as well, for similar reasons. But this all leads to a bigger question. Just how much of a bomb was the Velvet Underground's debut? Brian Eno famously said to Musician magazine in 1982 that while the album only sold approximately 30,000 copies in its first years, quote, everyone knows this quote, everyone who bought one of those 30,000 copies started a band. Over the years, writers, researchers, journalists often Whoa, okay. you got something to say here? All right.
No, I'm just being passive aggressive. Like, talk about.
No,
just
you're being fully
doing...
aggressive.
Well, okay, that's fair. I'm just saying, like, a quote I've had to read 10 million times. Couldn't have just sat on that one, could you, Brian? Maybe not say something that I'd then have to hear for the rest of my life. Go back to your tinkly piano.
You know, how many times have you heard "I Had a Dream"?
Oh,
It doesn't matter how many times you have to hear it. And sometimes it's a good thought.
good parry. Good
It's a
parry.
very, very nice thought. Okay. Many journalists over the years assumed that 30,000 copies was an actual figure for how many units this album moved. And while the album certainly sold less than Warhol and the band would have hoped, according to an MGM royalty statement dated in February 1969, the album's actually sold 58,476 copies through that period, which is a respectable figure for a late 60s LP. A music writer and filmmaker named Grant McPhee also conducted an investigation in the 2020s, and he determined that the Velvet Underground debut sold as many as 200,000 copies by 1971 alone. And then according to Nielsen SoundScan, which tracks sales, Velvet Underground and Nico has sold 560,000 copies since 1991. So there's a 20-year period in the middle that's not accounted for, but already we have almost 750,000. So when you put all the stuff that was sold between 1971 and 1991, this is certainly a million seller by this point. So, got him. You know it?
No.
Oh.
No, I don't.
The tracks for the Velvet Underground and Nico were largely complete by May of 1966, but it took nearly a year for the album to hit shelves the following spring. This wasn't just because of the cover logistics that we just talked about, the sticker and the lawsuit and all that. There were also promotional concerns. The exact circumstances aren't totally clear, but the band blamed their MGM Verb label mate Frank Zappa. They fostered a somewhat irrational belief that Zappa used his clout, which I kind of can't imagine he really had at this point, to hold back their release in favor of his own with the Mothers of Invention. Freak Out. Groundbreaking album. In a different sort of way. Sterling Morrison would say, the problem was Frank Zappa and his manager Herb Cohen. They sabotaged us in a number of ways because they wanted to be the first with a freak release. And we were totally naive. We didn't have a manager who would go to the record company every day and just drag the whole thing through production. John Cale claimed that the Velvet's wealthy patron affected the label's judgment as well. He would say, Verve's promotional department took the attitude, $0 for Velvet Underground because they've got Andy Warhol. Let's give all the bucks to Zappa. Whatever the truth may be, Sterling Morrison held a serious grudge against Zappa for the rest of his life. His interviews reveal this. He told Fusion magazine in 1970, Zappa is incapable of writing lyrics. He's shielding his musical deficiencies by prophetizing all these sundry groups that he appeals to. He just throws enough dribble into those songs. I don't know. I don't like their music. I think their album Freak Out was such a shuck.
That's a great derogatory term.
Yes. And he was even more blunt a decade later when speaking to Sluggo magazine in the 80s. Oh, I hate Frank Zappa. He's really horrible, but he's a good guitar player. If you told Frank Zappa to eat in public, he'd do it if he thought it sold records. Sterling Morrison, ladies and gentlemen.
He's just jealous because Frank's a way better guitarist than him.
To quote my dear friend Alex Heigl, there's nothing wrong with a little Frank Zappa. There's a lot wrong with a lot of Frank Zappa. Lou Reed also had some choice words for Zappa over the years. In Nigel Trevna's 1973 biography booklet of the band, Reed refers to Zappa as, quote, probably the single most untalented person I've heard in my life. He's 2-bit, pretentious, academic, and he can't play his way out of anything. He can't play rock and roll because he's a loser. He's not happy with himself, and I think he's right.
There's some savagely incisive comments in there.
Yeah.
But he's by far not Lou.
Oh.
He's not the least talented musician you've ever seen in your life.
But I don't fully understand this. The pair must have buried the hatchet in later years because after Zappa died of prostate cancer in 1993, Lou posthumously inducted him into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I haven't actually listened to the speech.
No, neither have I. But I found some message board posting that as of recording The Gift, it was supposedly Frank Zappa who was like, oh, you should stab a melon at the end of that song and put that sound effect in there. That is probably apocryphal, but one thing that I did hear or read that was Zappa confined his bile, at least publicly, to Nico. Once after she got done with a solo performance, he walked on stage immediately afterwards and started pounding a keyboard and reciting deadpan German-esque gibberish into the mic in a grotesque parody of her whole thing, which is pretty cruel. He was supposedly disdainful of Velvet Underground's overall druggy vibe, but I couldn't find anything of him like dragging them the same way that they did to him.
I wonder what was behind their posthumous makeup. I don't actually know.
Oh, Dweezil, some guy in our Zappa 7 years ago said that Dweezil Zappa on stage said that the feud between Zappa and Lou was very real.
Interesting.
And then in the next, here we go. When We're Only in It for the Money, the Frank Zappa albums, there's a snippet where Zappa quips, "I get to work with the Velvet Underground," which is as a group as Frank Zappa's group. But that was cut from the album. I don't know. That's wild.
I'll be your Dweezil.
Okay, so from Lou Reed biographer Kevin Corrier, who died in 2018 but wrote a book about Frank Zappa called Dangerous Kitchen. A week before the induction ceremony, guitarist Eddie Van Halen was asked by Zappa's son Dweezil to induct his father. Eddie supposedly turned down the offer, saying he didn't give out awards. Zappa's widow Gail suggested the 50s R&B legend Johnny Guitar Watson, who not only inspired Zappa as a teenager, but also played with his group in the 70s. The Hall refused, which, given their attitudes towards black people, is not surprising. So as a last-ditch effort, they came up with Lou Reed. And Zappa's kids, Dweezil, and presumably Moon Unit too, were well aware of this rivalry between Reed and Zappa, and so they were dead set against it. But then Gail, his widow, phoned Reed to discuss this whole thing, and, he apologized, I guess, and then agreed to do it.
We kind of touched on this earlier, but the whole Zappa VU feud is indicative of a weird East Coast, West Coast freaks feud in the mid-'60s. The Velvets did not go down well in California, as one kind of might expect. The Warhol crew felt the whole hippie thing was anathema to their brand of New York nihilism. "This love peace crap, we hated that," Mo Tucker said in the Tom Hanks documentary. "Get real. You cannot change minds by handing flowers to people who want to shoot you." Cher found herself at the band's first ever live show on the West Coast when they played The Trip on the Sunset Strip in 1966. Accompanied, of course, by Sonny, and amidst a star-studded audience that included members of the Byrds and Ryan O'Neal, Cher reportedly left the show early, offering this soundbite for the ages: "The Velvet Underground won't replace anything, except maybe suicide." Bill Graham, the famed the godfather of not just San Francisco rock, live rock in the 60s and early 70s, I should say.
Yeah.
Ran the Fillmore. Also hated them, both because he thought their long-winded experimental jams and their Warhol-sponsored multimedia show was treading a little close to the San Francisco scene, which trafficked in long-winded experimental jams and multimedia light shows. Mo Tucker recalls him hissing, "I hope you bomb," before taking the stage at the Fillmore, which is not kind. The Velvet Underground were much better received in the UK, however. David Bowie was passed an advanced pressing of the album after his early manager Ken Pitt took a trip to the States in 1966, making Bowie arguably one of the first people in Britain to hear the Velvet Underground, and almost certainly one of the first Brits to cover stuff like Waiting for the Man and White Light, White Heat. Bowie would contrast the Velvet's debut with the standard feel-good pop of the era, saying, "Their music was savagely indifferent to my feelings. It didn't care if I liked it or not." And honestly, that feels like a really good line to end on.
Hell yeah.
If that's not artistic purity and confidence in your own vision, then I don't know what is.
Who are you, Jordan? Let him know.
My name's Jordan Runtagh.
And I'm Alex Heigl. Thank you for listening.
Too Much Information was a production of iHeart Radio.
The show's executive producers are Noel Brown and Jordan Runtagh.
The show's supervising producer is Michael Alder June.
The show was researched, written, and hosted by Jordan Runtagh and Alex Heigl.
With original music by Seth Applebaum and the Ghost Funk Orchestra. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a review. For more podcasts on iHeart Radio, visit the iHeart Radio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.